So that was actually really helpful. I think it was really helpful to hear how things go through the Dáil, because I don't know about you guys, but I'm not all that familiar with how bills go through the Dáil. Yeah. And just as a disclaimer at the start as well, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a politician, and I'm not experienced with lobbying TDs. So just to put all that out in front, I'm an ordinary person who got interested in this, and I've done a lot of research this year. I did some media for one of the pro-life groups, but I'm not here tonight in that capacity. Just to be very clear, everything I'm presenting tonight is just, I have been looking at this legislation in the various stages quite a lot over the year, and I've learned a lot, and I'm just hoping to be able to pass on some of that knowledge to help you realise that the legislation isn't as scary as you might think. I'll be totally honest, this time last year, I don't think I'd ever looked at any legislation. But I started to look at it and go, oh actually, you can read it, it's not all legalese. Some of it's a bit technical and you don't need to know all of it. But I think it's not as scary as we think. But what is scary is the number of people who voted last May without ever looking at the legislation, just deciding who to believe and believing everything that person told them. Whether that was Simon Harris, whether it was somebody like myself, whether it was, Cora Sherlock or Maria Steele or whoever was speaking, they just decided who to believe and believed everything that was told to them rather than looking at the legislation for themselves. So that's what my aim is tonight, is to help you understand a little bit more about what's in the legislation, but more than that, to encourage you to actually look at the legislation and not be afraid of it, and to speak to people about the realities of the legislation and not just the ideas. And the other thing is as well, all of you, like a lot of you in this room, possibly have been campaigning on this issue for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, back in 1983 even, some of you might have been. I'm not, but what I'm hoping, I'm relatively new to campaigning on it, but I have spent a lot of time looking at it. What I'm hoping to do is to share with you the bit that I know, to help unlock the potential for the experience you have, either maybe dealing with somebody in a crisis pregnancy, or maybe campaigning on this issue, or maybe you're a doctor or a nurse or a midwife who hasn't got the time to spend hours looking at the legislation. So I'm hoping that you can take the bit of knowledge that I have and the encouragement that I can give you to look at it, and take that then, and just take 1 or 2 bits out of it. Don't feel like you have to understand everything. You have all the notes to go back and look at. The legislation is there in black and white to look at. So don't feel like you have to understand everything or get everything. But do try, as we're going through it, to pick up 1 or 2 bits, and maybe to take 1 or 2 bits and to get comfortable with those. So like John was saying, when people begin to speak on this, they speak on 1 or 2 issues and they get really keyed up in those ones. So take the one that jumps out at you and look at that in a bit more detail and get comfortable around that. So that would be the hope, is that you don't have to know everything or remember everything, but to try and pick up on something, and then to go back and look at it and to try and speak up on that. So that's the hope of what I'm doing. And just the disclaimer that, look, I'm not a lawyer or a doctor, but I have given this presentation to lawyers and doctors and experienced pro-life campaigners, and I haven't had any complaints yet about anything that's inaccurate in here. So hopefully we're okay with that as well. And again, anything I say, check me out, check up facts online, look at the legislation for yourselves. I would encourage you never to believe what anybody says in this debate. Look it up for yourself to be confident of what you're doing. So what we're going to look at tonight is the proposed abortion legislation. As we know, it's actually going to the Health Committee tomorrow. It's already come through 1 or 2 stages in the Dáil. But what's in it and what can we do to change it? So the goal of the presentation is to equip all of you to understand a little bit better what is the proposed legislation, what are the key points of it so that we understand the parameters of what we're talking about, and also what amendments are needed. Now, we might or might not get all the amendments in at this stage. In reality, we probably won't get them all in, but what I would say to you is, if amendments don't go in now, we're talking about amendments to protect mums, babies and healthcare workers. Whether those amendments go in now or not, they're going to be needed next year and the year after and the year after and the year after. A lot of people thought when the 8th Amendment was removed that this issue was done now. It's great, we don't have to think about it anymore. Until mums, babies and healthcare workers are protected as fully as possible, we'll be looking for more protections for them. And at the moment we're not looking at things that that people didn't vote for. We're literally looking at what are the bare minimum protections that people assume are in there, but they're actually not, and we need to try and get them in. So while it's important for now to try and amend what we can in the legislation in the first form, so whatever first form will be legal, in the next few months, it's also important to remember that this is something we're going to probably be discussing for months and years to come. It might go back and forward quite a few times with different governments and different amendments, and as people get experience, they might realise they need protections they didn't think they did. They might come back and want to put in some of these, or somebody might come along and try and fight with something that's already in there and expand it out again. So while it's important for the next few weeks to still keep talking to our TDs and encouraging them, informing them, helping to get them to stand strong and to fight for protections that they might assume are in there. But when we look at the legislation, we see they're not. We might be able to help show them why they need to go in. But it's also important to remember this is going to be a long-term fight as well. So we're kind of, take a little bit and learn tonight. I went to an awful lot of meetings before I was confident to say much about it. So, take this as another stepping stone from wherever you're at. If it's all new to you, just let it wash over you and take 1 or 2 bits. If you're quite familiar with it already, maybe try and hone in on something that's new for you as well. So, and as well I look at what's not included or what's not known, and we'll come back to that, but basically that is, people say it's all over, there's nothing to talk about, and I would say there's a lot to talk about in what's in the legislation that's proposed, but there's also a lot of things that aren't even in the legislation and that haven't been talked about, and we'll come back to what some of those are, but there's more than enough that needs to be talked about because very little was talked about before the referendum. So it's not enough that you understand it, I want to help you to speak about it. So to family, to friends, to colleagues, to politicians. So that's my goal, that you'll understand a little bit more about the legislation, you have the handouts, and that you'll be more confident to talk to somebody about it. So as I said, they think it's all over. We're being told just shut up and forget about it. You lost, get over it. I would say as long as there are babies that are going to have their lives ended brutally, women that don't know what they're about to go through, and dads that are going to lose out on their babies because they don't know what's going to go through or they don't know how to fight for their baby's life, and doctors, nurses, midwives, pharmacists who are going to be dragged into this procedure, knowingly or unknowingly, and suffering from that. As long as that's happening, this isn't over by a long shot. There's a conversation to be had. Yes?
Could I ask you to speak a little bit slower?
You can ask. I'll try. What I'll do is, because we're recording this, so if I'm going too fast and I do speak very quickly, if you just with your hands do that in the air, and I'll try and slow it down a little bit. Okay, so there's a conversation to be had. And this is really important. I've mentioned it already, but you don't need to know everything to say something. Like, even if after tonight, all you do is you go and you say to a friend, your family member, one of your politicians, I was at a presentation last night and I discovered that abortion would be allowed for all 9 months of pregnancy. I was shocked. I didn't realise that. I thought there were cut-off points. And there are some pieces of the legislation without cut-off points. That shocked me. I don't think people voted for that. If you say that, that's something. So don't feel you have to know everything to say something, start the conversation. So what's happening now? So the Irish people vote on the Constitution. Any changes to the Constitution have to go through the Irish people. What we all know, is the 8th Amendment, that respected the life of the mother and the baby, and as far as practical tried to protect both, always prioritise the life of the mother if there was a conflict, but tried to save the baby as well. Politicians sit in the Dáil and they vote on laws that have to line up with the Constitution. So as of now and up to now, the most recent legislation in this area is the 2013 Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act. Now that, if you look at it, and again, I would encourage you to have a look at it, even if it's just a 2-minute scan, and what you'll see very quickly is it's talking about treating the mother. So you need to treat the mother, even if it means the baby might not make it. But you do it in a way you're treating the mother, but you're giving the baby a chance to live where possible. So it's like the 8th Amendment. You try and protect both, but in that legislation it's kind of treat the mother and give the baby a chance if possible. Now there are 1 or 2 little controversial parts in that, but for the most part, that's what that legislation is doing. Treat the mother, even if the baby mightn't make it, the doctors won't be worried if the baby doesn't make it, but they'll try to give the baby a chance. That's what's in that legislation, that's where we are now. And that still exists at the moment. So the 8th Amendment, as we know, was removed. People voted on it at the end of May and it was removed in September. The 8th Amendment is no longer there. So what it was replaced with, and this is a really important point, it was replaced with this text to say provision may be made by law for the regulation of termination of pregnancy. It doesn't specify any form of legislation that has to go in, and that's a really important point. Simon Harris in the Dáil, when he introduced his proposed draft of legislation before the referendum, he said, well, I won't get into debating the details of this legislation, because if there's a yes vote, then we look at the details of it then. The people aren't being asked to vote on the legislation, they're being asked to vote on removing the 8th, so we won't look at the details of the legislation now. Simon Harris said that. Then in the referendum commission booklet that we all got out at home telling us, you're not being asked to vote on any particular legislation, you're being asked to vote on whether or not we remove the 8th Amendment. The High Court in the summer, with all those challenges, they made that same point. They said, no, people weren't being asked to vote on legislation. They were being asked to vote on removing the 8th Amendment or not. They couldn't have been asked, and this is the High Court now judgment, said they couldn't have been asked to vote on the legislation because there was no guarantee that any legislation would pass, or if it did, that it would be in the format that was put to the people. So it's very clear we weren't asked to vote on legislation. The politicians have been given permission to implement legislation. And because there's now no mention of the unborn baby in our constitution anymore, they are free to introduce legislation that disregards the life of the unborn baby. But they don't have to, and they're not under any obligation for any specific legislation. Now, it is important to acknowledge that yes, a draft version of the bill was put before the people in March, but can I ask people in this room how many people actually downloaded and read that? Yeah, 1 out of however many are here. And that, if that's among a pro-life group, I've talked to a lot of TDs who still, I don't think, have looked at any of the 3 versions in detail. They might have downloaded it and looked through it, but they haven't looked at it in any detail. Most people didn't really look at it. They kind of decided. A lot of people believed what Simon Harris said about it. A lot of people believed what pro-life group said about it. Not a lot of people downloaded it and read it. So no matter what they say, they believe in what people said in debates, but people didn't all take it and go home and study it before they voted. And anyone who says that they need to do a quick poll in any room they're in, and they'll find out fairly quickly that they didn't. But that's what happened with the Constitution. So that's happened. We're here at the moment. The 2013 legislation will remain on the books unless and until new legislation is passed. And that's what the government are busy with at the moment. So they're trying to introduce new abortion legislation. So that's what we'll be looking at tonight, is kind of the specifics of what's proposed and what some of the concerns are with it. They're calling regulation of termination of pregnancy. But that's what's being proposed, and the date you're hearing is January. But that January date is not the date they're talking about getting the legislation through. That's the date they're actually hoping that they'll be performing terminations. And it's quite shocking on Facebook and on Twitter. You're seeing people say, oh, we're within the 12-week window. A woman who conceives today can have an abortion in January. It's actually quite horrific to see people celebrating the removal of the 8th and the ability to end the life of an unborn baby, celebrating that now a baby conceived today, we can end their life in January. That is something that it's horrific. I think it's horrific to see that, but that is the reality. That is what Simon Harris is targeting. But to get that January date, he needs to get legislation through very quickly. Now, the drink driving bill that went through recently, that took about 3 years. I'm not suggesting this should take 3 years, but I'm saying I would say this bill is a whole lot more important and should have a lot more discussion on it. So I would question why the haste of pushing this through, especially at such a busy time of year for doctors, nurses and midwives. They haven't been consulted, they don't know what's going on, and in the middle of the worst time of year for hospitals, for our health system that's falling apart, they're trying to push this in. I think it's dangerous. The 8th Amendment, no woman died because of the 8th Amendment. But I think if Simon Harris tries to push this in January, that he's diverting resources from the health system, from doctors, nurses, midwives, into generating guidelines and procedures and training on this, and then into this chaotic new system, however it's going to look, instead of actually treating patients, instead of treating the patients on the trolleys, instead of opening up extra beds, instead of whatever else you could be doing, you could have men, women and children dying in the next few weeks, the next few months, because he's trying to push this in to be able to end the lives of unborn children that bit faster. I say this, and I'm not recommending that we obstruct legislation. I am saying we need to have a serious debate on this, because Simon Harris clearly said he wasn't debating the amendments and the details of the legislation before the referendum. It needs to be done now. So just to be clear on that. So what's important as well, the Irish people voted on the 8th. Some people still think they're going to get voted amendments. They won't. It's the politicians now. So that's where we're at now. The politicians will be voting on the legislation. We got a good summary earlier. I'll just summarise it briefly again. What's happening in the Dáil is that this was brought in, normally there's a first stage of preliminary, pre-scrutiny, preliminary phase of legislation where people look at what loopholes there might be to try and make better legislation. Simon Harris decided to skip that section, so he already rushed through one section. It went into the Dáil, it was read, there were some debates a few weeks ago. You might have heard about them because RTE decided to almost not cover them, but you can go back to oireachtas.ie, you can get the transcripts, you can get videos online, so you can find out. But there was a lot of discussion, but it got voted on to move it through to the committee stage. The 102 TDs voted to move it through, 12 voted against, a number of TDs abstained. Some TDs who are pro-life either abstained, weren't there, or they voted to move it to committee stage. Their rationale is that, look, we need to discuss the amendments line by line. I would say, look, this isn't something that needs a bit of tinkering around the edges. There's some serious issues that we'll look at. But that's where we are now. It has moved to committee stage. Over the next few days, the Health Committee will be discussing each of the amendments that were proposed. There are about 180 individual line items that are proposed to be discussed. A lot of them will be kind of grouped together, but they are published today, so they're available online as well. You can have a look at them. But they'll be discussed by the Health Committee. Other TDs can come in and just give their opinion on it or talk about it, but it'll be the Health Committee will vote on them. Then it'll go back to the Dáil. There'll be a bit more discussion on some of the amendments again, and then everyone will be asked to vote on whether the Dáil moves it forward or not. I think it'll go to the Shannon then afterwards, but that's kind of where we're at the moment. So just as a background to this, it is still important to talk to your TDs. What every one of your TDs and every TD in the country will be asked to do is to vote on this in a few weeks' time. I would encourage anyone who is pro-life to vote against it completely. I don't believe it's what people voted for, and I don't believe that even if some people voted for removing the 8th Amendment or for abortion in limited circumstances, if I was a TD and I was asked, will I put my name on this, knowing that my signature would help the lives of unborn babies to be ended, women to go through trauma without being told of all the consequences, and doctors, nurses, and midwives to be put in really difficult positions and to do things that might be really traumatic. There's nothing in the world that could induce me to sign my name to that. And I would encourage you to talk to your TDs and encourage them to vote against this bill when it comes back to the Dáil. And those that are on the Health Committee, if you know any of those, if you're in contact with any of those, ask them to speak up and to look at the amendments we'll be looking at this evening. They're not things that are out of line with what people voted for. These are humane procedures, humane amendments, reasonable amendments that I think if most people in Ireland heard what they were, they'd go, oh yeah, but sure, that makes total sense. And they would agree that they want them in as well. So this isn't about going against the will of the people, it's about trying to get in amendments that will make this, put in some protections for mum babies and doctors.
Just that 102 that voted that Monday, that 102 are going through the same thing the whole way down the line. And that's why he was standing up there this evening. He voted. It's either yeah or no, there's no middle ground.
Yeah.
And he's able to stand up there and say, oh no, I'm waiting for the next, either you're in or you're out. It's A or B. And I don't know, he voted, do you mind the same thing.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I don't think all of them will, but can we come back to that later? And just because we're on video, we're going to try to get the presentation done in one go, and we can have a great discussion then at the end if that's alright. But I know we just have to work with where we're at. And the first step we can all do is inform ourselves a little bit more and then use that information in whatever way we think is best. But it was very disappointing to see what happened. So, first thing is knowledge is power. Where can I view the heads of bill? So, you can go on to oireachtas.ie. There's a thing for bills and acts, a little button, you can press that. And you can either search by 105, it's bill 105. Of 2018, or you can search for termination or pregnancy and you'll find the bill there. You can download a copy. What I've given you out is it's a summary copy of it, so it's got the most important section, it's got the whole table of contents, and it's just got a summary of the few most important bits that we'll be looking at tonight. But the whole bill is only about 20 or 30 pages, so you can download it and print it fairly easily. So that's where to find it, and you can also, on the front of this document as well, it tells you how to find it as well. So you'll be able to find that, you don't need to write that down. So the first thing is, what is actually in this legislation? So what are the key points? I think the really important thing to note is that the whole bill, and even the name of it, the termination of pregnancy. And termination in the bill is defined as a medical procedure intended to end the life of a fetus. The Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act was that, protecting the life of the mother while giving the baby a chance, even if the baby mightn't make it. This is very clearly about all the circumstances in which it will be okay to intentionally end the life of a child. So that's just to be aware, that is the whole purpose of this bill. It's not about anything else, it's about how do we allow you to end the life of a child. And again, it's all on the front page of this one, it has the summary. But it's important to know, abortion, there's 4 conditions abortion will be legally allowed under this bill. And they're in sections, so you'll see the section numbers here. Sections 10, 11, 12 and 13. So up to 12 weeks with no reason at all. Again, we'll come back to that. I think most people, to be fair, were aware of that when they were voting, the vast majority. No reason required up to 12 weeks of pregnancy. Then up to viability if there are risks to the life or health of the mother. We'll see when we go through it that viability, the definition for that has moved dramatically. The goalposts have moved dramatically on that since we were asked to vote on it. But that one with the risk to life or health of the mother, that condition is also extremely similar to the condition in Britain the brown sea in Britain that has led to almost 200,000 abortions every single year. So we look at that as well. So the government talk about it as though it's only this 12 weeks, but in reality, this one here, this can allow abortions almost on demand very far into pregnancy. And they've really talked down that, but that's very similar to the condition that allowed abortion on demand in England. England doesn't have abortion on demand in law. There are strict conditions in there. They've been implemented in a way that have led to abortion on demand. This one here, up to viability on health risks to the mother or risk to her life, that can be implemented the same way here unless protections are put in here. And then the other one that the government aren't telling you about is that there are 2 sections in the bill that have no time limits at all. Now we'll see again that the definitions in this bill mean that termination can be allowed right up to birth and right up to the end of the birth process. And because of that, it's really important that where there's 12 weeks here, viability here, there's no time limits in the other 2 sections for either an emergency or if the baby's not likely to live. And that's really important to notice because the government are saying there'll be no late-term abortions. Simon Harris said so many times, my bill will mandate early delivery. It will not allow late-term abortions. I can tell you one thing for sure. As the bill stands, if nothing changes, late-term abortions will be allowed right up to birth in sections 11 and 12. So that's really important to know that. And if we're it'll be a lot clearer at the end of the presentation. If it's not, come talk to me about it afterwards because this is a point I think a lot of TDs haven't grasped. And I think it's important we help inform our TDs. They have a lot of different matters on their plate. They could have 20 or 30 pieces of legislation coming across their desk. So we're looking at this in a lot more detail. We care a lot about this. So it's up to us to inform ourselves and then help inform them. And we'll be looking at all of these in more detail. But also that there are major restrictions on conscientious objection. So they say there's conscientious objection section in there. There is, but it's not very strong. It doesn't really protect doctors, nurses and midwives. That needs to be strengthened, and we look at that. So that's kind of the key sections of what's in there. Then the amendments we need. So these are, again, it's not trying to be obstructive. It's about how do we protect people and who needs to be protected. So healthcare workers. Anytime you see this cross, it's like the red cross for healthcare workers, for doctors, nurses, midwives, pharmacists. Anytime you see this in the rest of the presentation, that cross, that means this is something that will help protect doctors, nurses, midwives, pharmacists. And the thing that we most need to protect them is that they have freedom of conscience to operate according to their own conscience, their best medical judgment, their best clinical judgment, and also their own consciences, that they're free to act in accordance to their conscience. They're not forced to do anything that they find morally reprehensible, that they find they ethically can't do, to be put in a position where they feel they have to leave their profession or that they have to do something that is absolutely abhorrent to them, that can cause trauma to them. And believe me, if you haven't seen what happens to a baby during abortion and some of the procedures that doctors, nurses and midwives might be asked to be involved with, if you're involved with that, that can cause trauma, believe me. Doctors, nurses, midwives, they need our protection. It needs to go beyond, and we'll look at it in more detail, but it needs to go beyond just, at the moment the legislation says doctors, nurses, midwives. That needs to go to pharmacists, to hospitals, to anyone who might be asked to participate. And the other thing that's really important is that we shouldn't be forcing doctors, in particular, to refer a patient on. If somebody asks me to go and kill somebody across the road, and I say no, but here's my friend over here, they've got a gun, they'd be happy to do it for you. Am I going to be complicit in that act if it comes before a court? Yes. Will I feel responsible if that person across the road dies because I directed somebody else to somebody who would do that? Yes, you would. There is nothing, if I was a doctor, there is nothing anyone could do to me to force me to do something that will help a woman find a way of ending her baby's life. Nothing. Unfortunately, if something doesn't change in the bill, that will be forced. And we all know what will happen there is, as soon as this becomes law, if it doesn't change, you will have pregnant women who are very pro-abortion, very anti-pro-life people, very anti-pro-life doctors and nurses, marching and demanding to be transferred. We know that will happen. I mean, we don't need to be a genius to work that one out. And we can't afford to lose doctors, nurses or midwives from our health system in Ireland at the moment. So the other very important group that needs protection and isn't being, and I think this is really important as well, it's not being protected. I have done this presentation to a number of groups, and in one of the groups there was a pro-life social worker was there, and she was really concerned at the things that weren't in there to protect women. She went back and she discussed it with pro-choice social workers, who first of all didn't believe her. They said, but of course there'd be information, of course there'd be protection for vulnerable women, of course there would be. But she said, well look, have a look at the bill. She looked through the bill and she said, oh my goodness, we need to put in X, Y and Z. So a lot of the things you'll see in the proposed amendments are things that actually pro-life and pro-choice people will agree that vulnerable women need protection. And any woman who's in a pregnancy where it was unexpected or she's got a difficult diagnosis, that woman is vulnerable, and we can all imagine the panic of being in that situation. None of us can say what we would do if we were in that situation. You are vulnerable in that situation, you need help, you need support. This legislation as it stands doesn't give them protection or support. It just talks about these are the ways it could be legal for you to end your baby's life. And the way Simon Harris is going, he wants a 24/7 hotline to help you get information about having a termination. Where is the 24/7 hotline for, calming you down about you being pregnant and scared and worried? And where are the ads on the radio? And where are the ads in the newspapers and the billboards to say, if you're pregnant, you're not on your own, we can help you? They have them for smoking. I know all the dangers of smoking. I know all the places there's a quick line that can help me, and I'm not a smoker. They already have a direct line to smokers with the boxes of cigarettes that they use. They have the messages they're getting to smokers, but they still put it everywhere because it's important to public health. If the government really wanted to protect women and inform women about all their choices and all the supports, they would have an advertising campaign, and they would have had it up before now, making sure that every woman knows where to go if she's pregnant and worried and needs help. They haven't done that, so I don't believe a word they say when they say they want to help vulnerable women. They say trust women. They're not giving us anything to work with. You have to, and when you're in that situation, you need to know that information before you're pregnant and terrified. You need to know before that there's help there. You need to know that before you go looking for how to get an abortion. You need to know that more than you need a 24/7 hotline for abortion. And what we're specifically looking for to protect mothers, and again, anytime you see this pregnant woman in the presentation, that's to indicate that that particular thing will help protect pregnant women. So the first thing that women need is to be informed, and the thing they most need is to be informed. People vote for choice, but it's not much of a choice if you're not getting enough information on all your choices and all your supports. So we acknowledge that abortion will likely be a choice that will be available next year, but that's no good if we're not getting women information on all their choices and all the supports, and also counselling. It's really important that women get access to counselling, non-directive counselling, and I'm not saying before an abortion and after an abortion, because that's what they talk about in England. You go in and, checkbox, oh, are you thinking about parenting? No, I can't. And, or what about adoption? No, I couldn't. You're thinking about abortion? Yeah, okay, let's arrange the abortion. And it's kind of, why do I can't have a baby? I'll pretend I can't, or I'll say I can't cope, and then tick the boxes, and yeah, grand, are you sure you want to do this? Yeah. That's the extent of some of the counselling. That's kind of tick the box. If a woman is in that situation, she needs access to genuine counselling before she makes a decision. Not once she's come in looking for an abortion because she thinks she has no other choice, but actually information to help her calmly look through all the other choices, all the supports, so that before she has to make that final decision, that she's fully informed. And if she does have an abortion, this is really important as well. If a woman does have an abortion, she will need support. Some women don't find it a problem, and an awful lot of women find it incredibly traumatic, and they will need support. The government already do provide support. They haven't told people about it. They didn't tell people about it in the referendum campaign, that if you've had an abortion and you need support, there is help for you. We will provide counselling, but that's really, really important that women know that that support is there, that they won't be judged, but there will be support, because any woman who's been that desperate that she felt she had no other choice and she went through with that, a lot of women find out the hard way just how traumatic it can be. I know people who've shared their abortion stories with me, and it's 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, they're still working through it. A lot of them have got counselling, some of them didn't need it, but that needs to be available, and women need to know it's there. And I think it's important for us as pro-life people as well to be aware that a lot of women, the way the debate has gone, a lot of women who have had abortions in the past, or who might have abortions soon, they might actually feel really terrified because they might be afraid of saying anything to a pro-life person for fear of being called a murderer or a baby killer. And I would hope, I know certainly for me, the first thing I will say when anybody tells me they've had an abortion is, are you doing okay? Do you need a hug? Have you got counselling? Would you like support? And I'll see how they're doing, and they need that support. But a lot of people are afraid they won't get that. So we need to find out, how do we make sure people will know they'll get support from us? But they can also be afraid of talking to somebody who's pro-abortion, because they can feel they'll be told, but you didn't do anything wrong, you did the right thing. What are you upset about? Nobody regrets an abortion, hardly anybody does. So a lot of those women will feel they can't tell anyone if they're genuinely struggling. So I think it's really important for us to make sure that women know there is support there if they've had an abortion. But ideally, before that even happens, that we make sure they have enough information that nobody will have an abortion because they didn't know what supports were available. So there are things we're asking that need to be put into the bill to protect women. And of course, last but not least by any means, babies. The ultimate victim in abortion is the unborn baby whose life is lost. Every single abortion stops a beating heart. Every single abortion takes the life of an innocent unborn child. We need to protect babies. We recognise there are situations that can come up in pregnancy where it might be necessary for health reasons or for the risk to the mother's life, we might need to end the pregnancy. That has always been the case. It was always allowed under the 8th, before the 8th, since the 2013 legislation. Sometimes you have to end the pregnancy because it's not safe for the mother. But ending the pregnancy up to now meant ending the pregnancy but giving the baby a chance where possible. What's being proposed now is that you could just end the life of the baby and not give the baby any chance at all. So we're saying we need amendments in here to say, okay, if there are situations that come up, it can't just be about ending the baby's life. You have to make sure that we give babies all possible chances. Because that will also mean that if it's not a genuine emergency, if it's not a genuine risk, that people won't be looking for loopholes like they do in England to try and say, oh well, I'll pretend I have a mental health problem, and they'll pretend to believe me and we'll have an abortion up to 24 weeks. And that will happen here unless we put in that you must try and deliver the baby, try and give the baby a chance where possible. That's really important. And if a baby is born alive, and you might say, but if you're ending a baby's life, they won't be born alive. It happens in other countries. If a baby is born alive, they must be given medical treatment. And again, these are the kind of things people say, but sure, of course a baby will be given medical treatment if they're born alive. Unfortunately, in other countries, they haven't been. What they often do is they actually use feticide if they're delivering the baby later in pregnancy. They actually deliberately end the baby's life before they deliver a dead baby to make sure the baby won't be born alive, because they really didn't want that baby to be born alive. What we're saying is, give the baby a chance to live, and if the baby is born, give that baby just the same amount of medical treatment as you would if that was a premature baby that was wanted. That's what we're asking for, is that babies are given a chance to live. And early delivery as well. Again, Simon Harris promised early delivery, I don't know how many times, it's not in his bill. Early delivery must be needed a point of viability. So what you'll see all the way through is I've actually taken sections of the actual bill itself. And I think it's just important that you've seen it and that you realise it's not scary. There's a table of contents at the very front page. You have that on your page as well. You have the whole table of contents so you can see the section numbers. So if anyone's talking about a particular section, you can see what it refers to. We're not going to go through that many of the sections, so don't worry when you see a lot of these here. We're not going through most of them. And a lot of the ones in the first section is part 1, preliminary in general. A lot of the stuff in there is it's more technical things. Some of them are important, but they're not for what we're going to look at tonight. But people who are really looking at this legislation will be looking into some of these in a bit more detail. The only one I'm really going to look at now is the definitions. A couple of the short definitions there. So I will just briefly mention as well this section on offences. So as some of you might know, in the 2013 legislation, it said there was an offence for someone to either procure a miscarriage or for somebody to have an abortion. There was an offence there, and there was talk about that a woman could be prosecuted for having an abortion, and a woman would be afraid of going to jail if she took abortion pills. No woman was ever prosecuted under that, but people said they were afraid they might be, even though no woman ever was. Nobody was pushing for them to. But what's important just to notice with this is, in the new version of the legislation, a woman will never be prosecuted for procuring her own abortion. However, if somebody tries to end or does end the life of a baby outside of the realms of this law, then they will still be prosecuted. Now, it's worth noting that I haven't looked at the full list of amendments yet, but there was talk about trying to remove all offences. But I think that's a really dangerous thing to talk about. You imagine any pregnant woman then, anyone, whether it's a partner, whether it's a parent, whether it's just some crazy person on the street who decides to end that child's life, couldn't be prosecuted. So I think it's really important that it's not about criminalising, it's about protecting mothers, protecting babies from that. So it's just important to note that that is one change, that there will be no woman can be prosecuted under this law for procuring her own abortion. But if somebody else does perform an abortion outside of the law, then they can be prosecuted. Okay, so Section 2, definitions. So in Section 2, there's a lot of definitions. I'm just looking at 2 of them. The first is termination of pregnancy. And just so you understand how this works, in this black writing up here, that's just kind of a short summary. In this case, it's easy enough but it's just a short, plain English summary of what this section is about. So termination of pregnancy, a medical procedure which is intended to end the life of a fetus. This bit down here, the black text and white writing, that's actually a section taken directly from the bill. So that's a screenshot of the bill itself. And this is, again, you'll see it all the way through. I'm taking the bit of the actual bill so you can see for yourself. And you'll see it in the case of this one. It's very easy to read. Termination of pregnancy in relation to a pregnant woman means a medical procedure which is intended to end the life of a fetus. So again, is that clearer than you might have thought legislation might be? No, it's not too scary. So that's actual text from the bill. What I would say about this is that termination of pregnancy, that phrase termination of pregnancy or to terminate a pregnancy, now meaning it's intended to end the life of a fetus, that's a radical departure from the current two-patient model that doctors, nurses, midwives, pharmacists operate in Ireland. At the moment in Ireland there are 2 patients in every pregnancy and the doctor or the medical person does their best to protect both. And it's interesting to note there is a section in the current Medical Council guidelines which deals with abortion, and in that section at the moment it says it may be necessary to terminate pregnancy to protect the life of the mother while making every effort to preserve the life of the baby. So that's what doctors and nurses currently do. They recognise sometimes you have to end the pregnancy and they say terminate the pregnancy while making every effort to preserve the life of the baby. Look what Simon Harris is proposing that this would change to. That termination of pregnancy would now be a procedure intended to end life. So it's really important to remember that when you look at this legislation. Anywhere later on where it says a termination of pregnancy will be allowed, it's not meaning anymore you end the pregnancy by delivering the baby. You could deliver the baby, but you could intentionally end the life of that baby as well. So it's just really important distinction to make with that, and that's a huge change. Now this definition, there's a lot of amendments that have gone in that are trying to change this definition in a lot of different ways, and we don't know yet what will happen with that, but what is important to understand is that's the intention. That's the sole intention of this whole procedure. That's the foundational step that this whole thing is built on. Foundational brick of it all. That termination of pregnancy is a procedure intended to end the life of a fetus. That's what all the other sections are about, is when could this procedure be carried out. So that's a massive departure from what we have right now. So anything like this, in a square box like this, like a rounded square, that's kind of a comment on something here. This thought bubble then, that's kind of what do we need to do about it. So either what amendments do we need or how do we need to be thinking to do something about this. You see there's a cross and there's a heart. That means that what we need to do is necessary to protect doctors or nurses. And when I say doctors, I mean doctors, nurses, midwives, pharmacists, any medical professionals, and to protect babies. So I'm saying that to come against this, that the legislation must give babies a chance to live, even if it's necessary to end a pregnancy early. We have to give babies a chance to live. And this will protect medics as well, because doctors, nurses, midwives, they've been trained to protect both lives. And to suddenly ask them to turn around and sometimes end a life, that is a huge thing to ask them to do, and it's a really horrific thing to ask them to do. We should be asking them to protect and save both lives as much as possible. Another really important point here is, say, a medical procedure. Now, I take issue with that word medical. Just because you're using medical or surgical means to end a life does not make abortion healthcare. Doesn't matter how often they say it. It's almost always a fully elective procedure that somebody chooses. They choose to end the pregnancy. They choose to ask the doctor to end their baby's life. It's a choice. And they talked about choice. Yeah, so it's a choice. And just because they call it a medical procedure, a surgical procedure, just because it's done in a hospital, just because it's done with medication, does not make abortion healthcare. Deliberately ending the life of an unborn baby is never medically necessary. And again, I repeat myself quite a lot with some of these points because it's really important. There is no medical condition in the mother that the solution is to end her baby's life. There are some conditions where the solution is to end the pregnancy. The only way to protect the mother is to end the pregnancy, but ending the pregnancy does not have to mean ending the life of the baby. There's never a situation where the direct intentional ending of the life is necessary. So that's, and let's go back to this briefly. So a medical procedure intended to end the life of a fetus. So that word fetus is really important as well. So we're saying it's a medical term covering all stages of development of an unborn baby until after birth. And the full definition here is fetus in relation to a pregnancy means an embryo or fetus during the period of time commencing after implantation in the uterus of a woman and ending on the complete emergence from the body of the woman. Now, is it possible to get any later in pregnancy than the time when the baby or the fetus is fully emerged from the body of the mother? Does that look like there's any restrictions in there in this definition? So that's a really important one to understand, that when we're looking at all the other sections, and I mentioned there's 4 conditions, you have to meet one of them to be able to have an abortion. 2 of them have time limits, 12 weeks and viability, sections 13 and 10. Sections 11 and 12 have no time limits. And we're saying that termination of pregnancy is allowed in sections 11 and 12 in some circumstances, no time limits in those sections, and a fetus is still a fetus until the baby is fully outside the body of the mother. So that is why I'm saying that this bill, unless it's changed, would allow abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy until the baby is fully outside the body of the mother. That is all the way through pregnancy. And that is more than what people were told. Now, this definition itself isn't necessarily anti-medical. That's not the problem. The problem is that there are no time limits in other sections of the bill to limit that. So, just because the term fetus is used, yes, it's technically a correct medical term, but it's a word that's used to dehumanise the unborn baby. If you look at the Medical Council guidelines, they talk about mother and baby. If we look now, they're talking about woman and fetus. People are trying to put in amendments to take out the word woman and to say the pregnant person. And they don't like putting in fetus, they want to say to end a pregnancy. So they're actually trying to move from talking about treating a mother and a baby. The bill is trying to talk about a woman and a fetus, and people are trying to put in amendments to talk about a pregnant person ending their pregnancy. So to take out any humanity of a mother or a baby or that relationship between them. And that's what's being done, is to dehumanise a baby. And I'll be honest, when I was younger, I thought, if you get pregnant, you don't want to be pregnant. You have an abortion and you end the pregnancy. Because I wasn't thinking about the life of the baby. And that's what's being talked about now, is ending a pregnancy. But it's just ending a pregnancy. Ending a pregnancy would always mean stopping the beating heart of an unborn child and ending that child's life. So no matter whether that's in the bill or not, as the word fetus, an unborn baby, it's still a baby. And anyone you know that's pregnant, even Simon Harrison, he's talking to his wife, I'm pretty sure he doesn't ask her, how's the fetus doing today, did you feel any kicks? And maybe he does, maybe he's changing his own language, but he'll be in the minority. A baby's still a baby, and we can still call a baby an unborn child, and that's no less correct, even if the bill says fetus. And this one here, the ending on the complete emergence of the fetus from the body of the woman. Unless that's addressed elsewhere by an amendment or by something, that could allow terminations during the birth process, like during labour, while the baby is part in and part out. Now that might seem a bit ridiculous. Has anyone heard of a partial birth abortion? So for anyone who hasn't, and I apologise if any of these are a little bit graphic, but there are some procedures where they'll actually start to deliver the baby feet first, and while the head of the baby is still inside the mother. According to this, still a fetus, still allowed to intentionally end the life of the fetus, then a procedure is done to do awful things to the baby's neck or brain and different things to end the life of the baby while they're half in and half out of the mother. I apologise if it's graphic and gruesome. It's an awful reality. That is something that happens. In the States, it's outlawed, I think in all the states, certainly in many of them. Why does it need to be outlawed? If nobody was doing it, it wouldn't need to be outlawed. If we don't change anything in our legislation, partial birth abortion could be legal. People might say, but it'll never happen, nobody would ever do that, Maeve. If nobody would ever do that, why does it need to be legal? So we need amendments to make sure that there are time limits put in, that and I don't think anyone in Ireland voted for partial birth abortion. There might be a tiny few in the minority, but the majority of Irish people did not vote for abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. So that's all the section 1 that I'm going to look at. Like I say, there are other bits in there, but I wouldn't get overly concerned about them. We've enough on our plates with the bits we're looking at. This part 2 of the bill, termination of pregnancy, this is kind of the meat and bones of it all. This is where a lot of the main stuff is happening. Sections 9 definitions we're going to look at, again just a couple, we'll just look at 2 definitions there again, and then sections 10 to 13 are the sections where these are the grounds you need to meet if you want to have an abortion under these sections. Then we talk about the review process and then certifications and notifications. We'll come back to those in a little bit, but this is kind of the main section where the main procedures are talked about. Part 2 of the bill. So we look at the definitions, and again, just 2, there are lots more definitions there, but I've just picked out the 2 most important ones. And the first one is the word health. So this is a really important one to notice because health is used throughout the bill later on. It talks about a risk to life or health or serious harm to the health of the mother. Health is defined very simply. Health means physical or mental health. Now it's important to note with the amendments as well, I've seen some of the amendments, they're trying to include social well-being and social health, and they're trying to push for a woman's health to consider all these things. So if a woman is saying, well, the baby might affect my social status or my social position or my economic circumstances, that might affect their health. But as it stands at the moment, Simon Harris's intention is that anywhere we see health later on, it means physical or mental health. Firstly, pregnancy is not a disease that needs to be treated. When someone goes in looking for an abortion, what illness are they trying to treat when you're looking for an elective abortion? What illness? Is the baby an illness? No. But putting it in as healthcare. So, and again, there's no physical treatment, or there's no physical condition in a mother that the treatment is to end the baby's life. Sometimes end the pregnancy, not end the life. And with mental health, again, this isn't something that is likely to change at the moment with the amendments, but it is important for future discussions. There is no evidence anywhere that abortion helps a woman's mental health. There is evidence that abortion can harm her mental health. It can lead to increased risks of anxiety, depression, of all sorts of substance abuse, of a lot of different disorders, a lot of different problems, and it can increase the risk of suicide. It doesn't help her mental health. It's not a treatment for mental health. Abortion on the grounds of mental health is not evidence-based medicine. So if a woman goes in and saying she's struggling with her mental health because she's pregnant, there's no evidence anywhere to say, well, the treatment in this condition is abortion. There is no evidence. Doctors should be practicing evidence-based medicine. There is no evidence for this. That's not an amendment that's going to get in this time around. I don't think it's even an amendment proposed because we've enough other things to deal with, but it is important to be aware of that. Just because it's gone into the bill and people have accepted it, it doesn't mean that that's actually evidence-based medicine. It's an excuse that's used a lot of times. And it can actually really, if a woman really is struggling with her mental health during her pregnancy, she needs support for that. And abortion won't necessarily change that. It can make her mental health worse. If she has mental health problems, she needs proper mental health support. And just to note that the mental health grounds, that is the grounds that has led to abortion on demand in Britain. So 98% of all abortions in Britain in 2017 were on the grounds of a risk to the mental health of the mother. So there's a number of conditions you can have an abortion in Britain. By far the most common is a risk to a woman's health. And of those, it's like 99 point something of those were on the risk to her mental health. So that's almost 200,000 abortions in Britain carried out last year on the risk to a woman's mental health. That's 1 in 5 of every pregnancies. So in England every year, there are around 700,000 babies born and around 200,000 babies aborted. So 1 in every 5 pregnancies that could have come to a term ended in abortion. That 1 in 5 figure that a lot of people didn't even believe, they didn't spend the 2 minutes to look it up, that's where it comes from. And either you have in Britain that there's a mental health epidemic, that 1 in 5, every 5 pregnant women are so traumatised by being pregnant that they can't cope and they have to end their baby's life. It's either a mental health epidemic that England is totally ignoring and not treating, or people are using this as an excuse. And we all know that's what's happening. And you miss out on the women who actually do have genuine mental health problems because everyone's going in and ticking that box. So, and the important thing as well in England is that all these women having abortions on the grounds of mental health, they're not offered counselling afterwards. It's not made sure that these women get mental health, proper mental health assessments with a psychiatrist or at least with a counsellor. There's very perfunctory things that are just checked to make sure they're okay. If a woman is having an abortion on the grounds for mental health, and that's the grounds they're giving, they should be providing comprehensive mental health support before, during and after, before and after that procedure if they're going to do it. So ideally we would like mental health grounds excluded from the legislation because there's no evidence for it and it can harm women's mental health. That's unlikely at this stage. If it is included, then we do need to make sure that particularly if a woman is looking for an abortion on the grounds of her mental health, a risk to her mental health, that she is offered counselling before she makes any final decision and that she is informed of all her choices. And if she does go through with an abortion, that she is offered counselling afterwards. That is the very least we can do to protect women in this country. We don't want to repeat the mistakes that England have made. The next one is viability. This is another really important one to notice when we talk about what people voted for and what they didn't vote for. The term viability, if you mention it to anyone, what is your guess on roughly what time in pregnancy are we talking about if we say viability in number of weeks? Yeah, so kind of, 24, kind of 23, 24 weeks, that kind of time is roughly what you think about. And before the referendum, viability was defined like this. There was a full stop here. So before the referendum, what people did vote on, the few that did look at this, it says viability means the point in a pregnancy which, in the reasonable opinion of a medical practitioner, the fetus is capable of survival outside the uterus. Full stop. So with that definition that was there before the referendum, you kind of think, okay, we're talking about up to 23, 24 weeks, which is similar to Britain. They have their 24-week limit for risk to health. But what changed after the referendum was this bit. Without extraordinary life-sustaining measures. So if we read that again, the point at which the fetus is capable of survival outside the uterus without extraordinary life-sustaining measures. What are we talking about now? 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. Anyone have any premature babies that were born at 28, 32, 34 weeks that needed maybe extraordinary life-sustaining measures? So that definition has changed since the referendum, and it's gotten to a point where we don't really know where it's going to end. It's also worth noting that it's in the reasonable opinion of a medical practitioner. Nobody knows how long a baby will survive, or if a baby will survive, or what treatment they will need until they're born. You can make guesses, but you'll never know. So it's completely subjective, totally open to abuse, that a doctor can just say, well, I think this baby, there's no time limit. Well, I think this baby, isn't going to survive. Their heartbeat looks a bit weak. Do you know what? I think they're 28 weeks, but you know what? I just don't think, based on my experience, I don't think they're going to make it. That's wide open to abuse if we don't have a time limit in there. And we know some babies born at 21 weeks have survived. Now, the chances are slim at that stage, but at 22 weeks, you've got a 6% chance of survival. At 25 weeks, it's jumped up to 72%. But even if your baby only had a 5% chance of survival, wouldn't you want to take that chance and see what you can do, see can you treat the baby? And this idea that a baby that is born prematurely, so in a normal pregnancy, everything's going fine, the mother and father want the baby, everything's going well, and at 23 weeks that mother goes into labour, and if that woman goes into hospital, and they deliver that baby, and they say, please do everything you can to save our baby, there's a pretty good chance that they will be able to save that baby's life. Imagine then another doctor in the next room down the hall, or out in a GP clinic somewhere in Kilkenny, sitting there and saying, well, we're at 23 weeks, but it's not really viable yet, and I know you just kind of found out you're pregnant, and I know this is difficult for you, and you don't really want to have a baby. Well, look, they probably wouldn't survive at this stage. It's kind of 50-50, and they could just decide, well, look, we'll help end that pregnancy. So that's the kind of health system we might have in the next few months. Is a health system where doctors are going to get to decide who lives and who dies. The wanted baby gets the medical treatment, and the unwanted baby, or the baby that the mother is just totally traumatised by a situation that's going on in her life, and instead of helping her with that trauma and situation, getting her out of the difficulty, helping her with whatever the difficult situation is, instead of that, we just suggest to end her child's life. And that some babies will be wanted, some babies wouldn't be wanted. That's the danger of this, is that making this extraordinary life-sustaining measures. Nobody's even defining what extraordinary life-sustaining measures are. This would be totally subjective if there's no actual time limit put in there, or if there isn't more clarity brought to this. What's also important to note is that bit, as I said, was added after the referendum, so people didn't vote on that because it wasn't in there. And what are extraordinary life-sustaining measures? Premature babies often require medical intervention, even when they're just a few weeks early. And what would it be? Is it late in the third trimester? What if we're talking about a baby that's, say, 36 weeks, 37 weeks, where they're known to have maybe a heart problem, or we know they're going to need a heart transplant, or we know they're going to need some surgery when they're born? Would that be extraordinary life-sustaining measures? Could you suddenly say that baby, because we know they're going to need a surgery as soon as they're born, could you say that baby wasn't viable? Who knows? I would like to see that there was a specific point in the legislation beyond which you would always, like Simon Harris said, beyond viability, early delivery will be mandated. I would like to see viability nailed down a little bit more, that at a certain point where we know a baby could potentially survive, that we commit that every baby at that point would be given all the life-sustaining measures that are needed, that the same that a wanted baby would get, that an unexpected baby or a baby with health challenges would get that same support as well. And that's what we're looking for in that one.
Going down the same road that England went.
Exactly.
Exactly, because I know of cases where that happened, where they didn't get the proper aftercare.
Yeah.
And even if they lived for a certain amount of time afterwards, like say a heart operation, they had Down syndrome and they had a hole in the heart and they wouldn't operate, and then they said the baby would only live for 2 weeks. That child lived until it was 2.5.
Yeah, I mean, there's horrific things that happen, and up to 20, 30 years ago, I think babies born with Down syndrome didn't get medical treatment at all. They didn't get the surgeries that could save their lives. I have a very good friend who's had twins, and one of the twins was born with Down syndrome. They only found out when the baby was born. They had to do all sorts of procedures. That poor little baby went through a lot, but that boy just turned 10 this week, and he's the most incredible little boy. And to think that, could have decided, well, because he's going to need these procedures, we're not going to give him a chance. That's not the kind of health system I want. I don't think it's the kind of health system most of us want. We want the most fun, but to get the most protection. Being wanted or not. And I think it's important to note as well, Leo Varadkar was asked in an interview, because he's a former doctor, Taoiseach is, he was asked by Sean O'Rourke, and it didn't get a lot of publicity. He was asked, Leo, as a patient, or as a doctor, when you're treating a pregnant woman, are you treating one patient or two? And he said, well, obviously, the patient you're treating is the patient in front of you, and in the early stages of pregnancy, the patient you're treating is the patient in front of you. But then, when it gets to later on in a pregnancy, like maybe viability, or, if the baby is wanted, then you treat it as a patient. No. Now, that is what's in the law, as it is. I mean, a doctor makes a reasonable judgment. Is this baby viable? Can we save their life? Or will we say that we can intentionally end their life? So that definition of viability is very hazy. It's not what people voted for. And that can lead to a lot of abuse if it's not changed. So just a little break from all the legislation and a little reminder, and kind of a note on dates as well. So did you know babies move their arms and legs at just 7 weeks? So we all have these milestones, and any of us who are canvassing would have learned some of these milestones of the baby's development, or anyone who's had a baby or maybe a grandchild recently, and you've seen the scans and you've been following along and seeing it's the size of a pea and a lemon and a lime and all these different things, and you see, oh, the baby's fingernails are developing. Just a word on dates to be aware of with this legislation. When we say 7 weeks, and in the pro-life movement we often talk about weeks from the point of conception. So when we talk about 7 weeks, we're talking about 7 weeks from the moment of conception when that new, unique human life was formed. Within the bill, and within a lot of medical terminology when you're dating a pregnancy, you actually go back to the date of the woman's last period, which is normally about 2 weeks before the date of conception. So it's just to be aware of that difference in dates. So when the bill talks about 12 weeks, it's not talking about 12 weeks post-conception, it's talking about 10 weeks post-conception. 12 weeks for the woman's last period. So it's just to be aware, and just on a really practical little note on that, these are the baby models, and you can see I have the full set, and we might look at some of them in a while, but the full set, this little baby model of 12 weeks, just to be aware, that's 12 weeks post-conception. So those little models are actually slightly bigger than the 12-week cut-off point. Now, you can see this little baby, I mean, 2 weeks beforehand, they were still quite developed. So they got little fingers and toes, you can see them, they're sucking their thumb, you see them in the ultrasound, they're moving around. They were quite developed 2 weeks before that as well. But just to be completely accurate, if you are using these little baby models, 12-week ones, they're actually slightly bigger than the 12-week cut-off point where there's no limit. These little precious feet pins, I don't know if you're familiar with those. Those little precious feet pins are 10 weeks post-conception. So that is exactly the point, the cut-off point in the legislation. So that's a really good, I'd advise you to get some of those and to have those, because that's a good cut-off point, or that's a good illustration point to say, look, a little baby, this was taken from a model of a baby that was aborted. So this is accurate to the size of a little baby's feet when they're at 10 weeks, when no reason is even needed to end that baby's life. And a lot of people are still surprised at how developed a baby is. You'd be surprised how many people are surprised when they see that ultrasound scan at 12 weeks and they see how developed the baby is, or they see maybe a picture of a baby that was miscarried at 12 weeks, and they see, the little fingernails, and they see, their fingerprints are starting to form. It's like they have all their organs, all their limbs, they just need to grow and mature and develop. So it's just a little point on dates, just to be aware of when you're talking to people about dates and looking at the dates in the bill. They're a little bit different to what we might talk about. Okay, so back to part 2. So we've looked at definitions. You can see very clearly that I'm just highlighting sections 10 to 13 here. So these are the most important sections of the bill, really. There are 4 situations where it would be legal to end the life of a baby. And when somebody is looking at this bill, they have to look at Are the conditions of any one of these 4 sections met? If they are, we can do a termination of pregnancy, which means a procedure to intentionally end the life of the child. So there are the 4 sections there. So we look at 4 of these in a bit more detail. I actually started with section 13, early pregnancy, which is the 12 weeks. I just think it makes the most logical sense to start with the bit everybody knows about, and the early stage in pregnancy. And then we'll go back to section 10, which is the risk to life or health. And how far was the time limit on the risk to life and health? Viability. Yeah. So the risk to life or health of the mother can be done up to viability as it stands. And then for section 11, the risk to life or health in an emergency. What's the time limit there? Yeah, there's no time limit. That's right up to birth. And section 12, a condition likely to lead to death of a fetus, or we say a life-limiting condition. You'll hear people talking about a fatal fetal abnormality or anomaly, but it's not a medical term, but a condition where the baby might not die or might not live for long. So that's section 12. And again, is there any time limit on that one? No. So they're the ones we're going to look at, those 4 sections now. They're the most important ones. And that's the bulk. Like, there are a few other bits, but once we get to the end of those 4, that's 90% of what I'm going to talk about done. So first one is early pregnancy, section 13. So up to 12 weeks, no reason is required, 1 doctor and a 3-day waiting period. So that's just the summary of the top. The actual text then here, it says a termination of pregnancy may be carried out in accordance with this section by a medical practitioner where, having examined the pregnant woman, and this is where it gets a bit legal, but where he or she is of the reasonable opinion, formed in good faith, that the pregnancy concerned has not exceeded 12 weeks of pregnancy. So the first thing to say about that is that it's really dangerous to rely on an estimation of what stage the pregnancy is at. I have 3 friends in my life who found out they were pregnant at 6 months. Now, at least one of them, when they finally realised they were pregnant, they thought they were 2 or 3 months pregnant. Based on their own dates, maybe regular cycles and their own dates, they thought they were 2 or 3 months pregnant. They were shocked to discover they were going to have a baby in 2 or 3 months. They didn't realise that. Women get their dates wrong all the time. Not everyone's paying attention, especially if you're not planning to become pregnant. You're not necessarily paying attention, and things don't always work out perfectly the way you think. So a woman can get her dates wrong, or a woman might know that she's getting close to that 12 weeks mark, and she might change her date slightly. So if we're relying on a woman to know accurately and to be able to tell her doctor and the doctor to believe her, then that's a lot of assumptions there. And the risks are, if the dates are wrong and if a termination of pregnancy is done, that can have catastrophic effects. If an incorrect dose is given, if it's a medical abortion, then you can either have that, the baby will come out really early, the baby will be delivered and still be alive, and it can be really traumatic. Or if the dose is too strong, it can cause major internal damage to a woman's system. We've heard that during the debate. Doctors were talking about it needing to be regulated so that you didn't have incorrect doses. Unless we have accurate dating of a pregnancy, we can still have that problem. And the third thing that's really important is if a woman has an ectopic pregnancy, if the baby is developing somewhere outside her uterus, then if that's treated as if it was a normal pregnancy and she takes an abortion pill and then she thinks she's had a miscarriage, thinks the baby is gone, a lot of stuff came out, she thought the baby was gone, that baby could still be growing in another part of her body. And if that baby continues to grow in her fallopian tubes or somewhere else, particularly in the fallopian tube, they can burst and she can die. So needing to have ultrasound to date a pregnancy, it's not just about it's not at all about putting obstructions in place. That's needed to protect women. Women can die if they don't get accurate dating of their pregnancy, or they can have serious health risks. It's needed to protect doctors and nurses, midwives, pharmacists, because if they make a wrong decision, they could be sued for that, for the health problems that occur to the woman. So for doctors' sakes, and the doctors are actually agitating strongly for this one as well, so I think this will come in, that it has to be accurately dated with ultrasound, it has to be made available. And of course, protect babies. We know a lot of people were told that it's just a fetus, it's just a clump of cells. They don't realise how developed their baby is. When a woman sees on the ultrasound and she sees the little fingers, toes, she sees the baby moving around or jumping around or stretching out or sucking their thumb, and she hears the baby's heartbeat, that's a very different decision that you're making. A lot of women who are thinking about abortion because they're just thinking they're pregnant, they can't be pregnant, they just can't cope with it for whatever reason. But when they see a little baby, often they switch to thinking, oh my goodness, okay, I don't think I can cope, but how am I going to protect my little baby? Will somebody help me to protect me and my baby because I don't know what to do? Somebody help me protect me and my baby. And that change can happen. So what some of the amendments that are being proposed are around this. So like I say, the doctors are really pushing for this for everybody's safety. I think it's really important that ultrasound is performed to accurately date the pregnancy, but also that it's offered to a pregnant woman. Not that she has to see it, but that she has to be given a chance and be given information about, just what stage the baby is at and what stage the pregnancy is at, and that she's offered the opportunity to see her baby on the screen and to hear the baby's heartbeat. That's a really important amendment. The second part of this is that a termination of pregnancy cannot be carried out unless a period of not less than 3 days has elapsed. So this is the 3-day waiting period. There's a lot to talk about this. There's efforts to try and take this out, and there's efforts to try and keep it in. It was 72 hours, I think, now it's 3 days. 3 days could be you go into the doctor on a Monday evening and you come back for an abortion on a Wednesday morning. It's not really 3 days, so we'd hope it really go back to the 72 hours. But I think it's just really important that this time period is kept. And it's not obstruction. It's actually saying this is a really big decision. A decision that will end one life and that can have really serious consequences for the woman and her partner, her husband, her boyfriend, the father of the child. That can have consequences for him as well. So it's really important that decision, that there's time given. Any important decision that we make, we sleep on it. You've got 14-day return periods for all sorts of things, even with bank loans and things like that. You get time to think about your cooling off period. With a decision like this, it's really important someone's time to think. And I would say as well, they're talking about people marching into having done all the research, they go in looking for an abortion, and why should they have to wait? Why can't we trust women? A lot of women come into their doctor thinking about abortion. They're not coming in having looked at all the research all the time. Some of them might, but there'll be an awful lot of women coming in, and it might be the first time they've thought about it, or they're just thinking about it, they're not really sure. What we would hope is that the first time a woman makes a connection with a medical person to consider a termination or to even talk about her pregnancy, that she needs to be given information on all her options, all her supports, and given time to go away to think about it, maybe to call up a support line, to go see a counsellor. And she needs that time. That time is so important. The 3 days can save lives if women are given helpful information and counselling. And that 3-day period is under threat. There are people who want to take that out. I think if we want to protect women, we need to keep that 3-day period in. Women must be offered counselling and information on all choices and all supports. And the 3-day period must be protected. One other really important point here is this 12 weeks. So gender and some disabilities can be diagnosed by 12 weeks. We all know people now who are getting tests, early tests all the time to find out what gender the baby is, to find out if the baby has certain conditions. People can know before 12 weeks if the baby has Down syndrome. And we know that that information has been and will be used to decide whether to continue a pregnancy or not. So when Simon Harris talks about protecting babies against discrimination on the grounds of disability or gender, there's nothing in the bill to protect babies. Up to 12 weeks, no reason is even needed. And we know that people can find out that early, and we can be sure people will start finding out earlier and earlier, and more people will start finding out with that 12-week cut-off point. So that's really important. And later on in the bill, there is nothing anywhere to protect against discrimination on the grounds of disability. Simon Harris talked about it a lot. Did anybody hear him say, my bill will not allow discrimination on the grounds of disability? He said it again and again and again. There is nothing in his bill that provides any protection, and up to 12 weeks no reason is required. So that his bill does not provide any protection. And we know, I'm sure most of you know the statistics in other countries, like in Britain, 90% of babies diagnosed with Down syndrome in the womb have their lives ended. It's the same in Germany. In Iceland it's 100%. In Denmark I think it's 98%. And in Ireland, what I learned during the referendum campaign, which shocked me, was that at the moment some of the private hospitals in Dublin, they offer this test, and they say of the parents who get the test and get a diagnosis of Down syndrome, 50% or more are aborted already in Ireland. That came out during the campaign on the Joe Duffy show, and very few people heard about that. It's already happening. So for Simon Harris and all his outrage about nobody would ever do that, they're already doing it. I think 40 or 43 babies from Ireland were aborted on the grounds of Down syndrome, either in 2016 or 2017. It happens already. It will happen more. And there is no protection in the bill. And if somebody tries to tell you there is protection, ask them to show you where in the bill, because it's not in there right now. So that's another amendment that we're putting in, and asking that we would put in some protection so that no woman can find out that her baby has a disability, and that baby, because they have a disability, could have their life ended, even though a healthy baby could, a baby without that condition couldn't. That's discrimination, and we're, talking about inclusivity and choice and, protection and rights and human rights and all these things. This goes against everything, that we're making a lot of progress in human rights in a lot of areas in the world. This is a really regressive human rights step to allow abortion on the grounds of disability. And to pretend that it's not happening in other countries is just blindness, I think. So we need to protect against discrimination. Okay, so section 10 is the risk to life or health of the mother. This is the section that's really like the one in England that has led to abortion on demand. So it's up to viability. We've looked already, and this is the only place that the word viability is used. So that's why that definition is important. Viability, we don't know, somewhere in the second or third trimester. But up to viability, so somewhere later in pregnancy, if there's an unspecified risk to a mother's life or health, and then it needs 2 doctors again, or 2 doctors. So the first one, the up to 12 weeks, is just 1 doctor. For this one, it's 2 doctors, and it includes risks to mental health. So here we see again 2 medical practitioners of a reasonable opinion, formed in good faith, again, reasonable opinion, that there's a risk to life or serious harm to the health of the mother, of the pregnant woman. The fetus has not reached viability, and it's appropriate to carry out the termination of pregnancy. So they're the 3 things. That there's a risk to the life or serious harm to the health. The fetus isn't viable, so the baby isn't reached viability, and it's appropriate. So risk to life was already covered by the 2013 legislation. So that was already covered, there was no change needed for that. What's new and different is this risk to health. Serious harm to the health of the mother. So again, really similar to the UK law, it's led to abortion on demand, led to 1 in 5 pregnancies ending in abortion, 1 abortion for every 4 births. Mental health should be excluded due to lack of evidence, and viability must be defined better than it is right now, because right now viability is almost meaningless. And again, as we've said before, intentionally, so it says it's appropriate to carry out the termination of pregnancy to avert the risk. Intentionally ending the baby's life is never appropriate in a pregnancy. Even if ending the pregnancy sometimes is required. Counselling and support are appropriate if there's a risk to a woman's mental health. And the danger is that mental health goes in the way it wasn't written, then women with actual mental health problems and mental health risks won't get the support they need, because a lot of people might be going in and saying, and there's no point in saying, but nobody go in and pretend they have a mental health problem. It happens in England every day. So this one is there's a bit more to it, so we won't go into it in as much detail. But this is in a really important section as well, an emergency risk to life or health. So emergency, this is up to birth, so there's no time limits in this at the moment. There are amendments gone in to try to put in time limits on this as well, that because termination of pregnancy is intentionally ending life, we're saying, yeah, but you try and deliver the baby. Even if there's an emergency and you have to end the pregnancy, you try and deliver the baby. But the law as it stands, as it's proposed, is up to birth, no time limit at all, an emergency risk, and we're back to 1 doctor. Because this is an emergency situation, so there's 1 doctor, it could be 4 o'clock in the morning, it could be a young doctor, it could be a really tired doctor, it could be an experienced doctor. 1 doctor making that call on life or death at this stage in an emergency. Risk to mental health is included, no conscientious objection. So this is kind of a more technical point. Ignore it if this is all a bit too much. But for anyone who's interested in the more technical details, when we talk about conscientious objection is there to say, look, you shouldn't have to take part in this procedure. In the 2013 legislation, there was no conscientious objection because, there was no conscientious objection because it was if there's a risk to the life of the mother. And they're saying, look, if there's a risk to the life of the mother, you can't object to saving the mother's life. Which would be fair enough if you're talking about ending a pregnancy. But we're talking now about an emergency risk to the mother's life and the decision to end the life of the baby, maybe later on in pregnancy. So that is a difference. So a nurse, for example, the doctor decides, let's say 30 weeks for argument's sake, 30 weeks of pregnancy, there's a risk to the mother's life or a serious risk to her mental health. The woman is saying, I can't cope with being pregnant, we have to do something. You'd like to think that they'd deliver the baby, and they might, and give the baby treatment, maybe put the baby up for adoption if the mother really can't handle it. You'd like to think that would happen. That could be allowed, could be legal, but what would also be legal at that point would be for a doctor to decide, we're going to end the life of this baby, this mother doesn't want the baby clearly, she can't cope with it, the best thing to do for everyone would just be to end this baby's life. That could also be legal for 1 doctor to decide, and because there's no conscientious objection to this section, then that nurse who's asked to participate in that procedure, in intentionally ending the life of that baby at 30 weeks, he or she, that nurse, would have no way out of that one without having to risk their job or their career and to have to be part of that procedure that ends the life. Like I say, I don't think there's any doctor or nurse that would have any problem with being part of a procedure to end a pregnancy at any stage to protect a mother. But when they're being asked to do something that ends a life, that's a very different story altogether. It's really significant that there's no conscientious objection there, because this could mean ending the life of a baby right up to birth. And that's a really important point for that one. So again, there's a lot of mumbo jumbo here, but it's so basically under this section you could have an abortion if one, a medical practitioner, so one is of the reasonable opinion, formed in good faith, that there is an immediate risk to the life or of serious harm to the health of the pregnant woman, and it's immediately necessary to carry out the termination of pregnancy to avert that risk. So the first thing we said there is there's no time limits. So one doctor could decide to end the life of an unborn baby one day before their due date. That's what this section would allow. The other one is this serious harm to the health. So serious harm to the physical or mental health. Dr. Boylan, Dr. Peter Boylan, who many of you will have seen during the campaign, he said, well, I have no problem with the word serious being in there, because if a woman says it's serious, it's serious. And we're trusting women now, aren't we? We're not trusting our doctors anymore, we're trusting women. So if a woman presents with a really serious mental health emergency that she says is due to her being pregnant, that one doctor could decide there and then at any stage of pregnancy to say, okay, let's end the baby's life. That's what could be allowed under this bill. Serious harm is not defined anywhere. Again, like we've said in previous ones, we should be excluding mental health grounds here, and we should be providing counselling if a mother is struggling with mental health difficulties, as we've said before. And again, coming back to probably my favourite point, but I think it's one of the most important things to really understand, to understand the intention behind the legislation. Intentionally ending the baby's life, because we're talking here about termination of pregnancy, which is intentionally ending the life in this bill. Intentionally ending the baby's life is never appropriate, even if ending the pregnancy is sometimes required. And this guy, Dr. Anthony Levatino, I don't know if you've seen any of his videos, the leaflet I gave you out that goes through the different types of procedures that are the most common procedures that are done for abortions. That's from his website, so it's abortionprocedures.com. If you don't know what happens to a baby during abortion, I recommend looking at it. It's not graphic or gory, it's cartoon textbook style, but it is worth looking at to see how things happen. But he was a doctor who performed a lot of abortions in the past until he lost his own child, and then the next time he did an abortion he realised that was someone else's child. So he's become extremely pro-life, and he's dedicating an awful lot of time to educating people on what the realities of abortion. It's worth looking at his resources, what I handed you out, but also to look at those videos. But he makes some really good points, and he educated me a lot on things to do with late-term abortions or late-term risks to a mother. So he said, I have saved, we hear about, what about the mother whose life is at risk, whose life is in danger? Of course we want to help her, of course we all do. But he said, I have saved hundreds of women from life-threatening pregnancies. But I did it by ending their pregnancy, either by delivery, by either induction of labour, or a C-section. So he's saying, yes, we can protect those women who are in life-threatening situations by delivering the baby, or by doing a C-section if we need to. He talked about a patient who came in extreme difficulties in her pregnancy, and he said, we just did a C-section within an hour. The baby was out, and we saved the baby's life, and we saved the mother's life. And so the baby doesn't always make it, but you do your best to try and help them to make it. And this is another really important point that he shared. He said later on, and you'll understand when you look at the procedures, and if we even look, it might even help to see. We're talking about this little baby is at 22 weeks, which is 24 weeks. This is around the viability stage. So you can imagine this little baby, if you're pregnant with this little baby, and your body is, and your cervix are doing everything they can to keep that baby inside. It's not an easy process to get that little baby out of your body. If we go a few weeks further on, this little baby is 26 weeks from conception, or 28 weeks as we're dating pregnancies. Still a long way before birth. But you imagine this little baby. That's going to take quite a while to prepare your body to get that baby out of there, if your body isn't ready to I mean, when somebody goes into labour, it takes a while for their body to naturally be able to deliver a baby. You know, our bodies aren't ready for that at any given moment. So if you're talking about a late-term abortion, it can take a day or two to prepare a woman's body to deliver that baby. And when you're talking about late-term abortions, very often, because they don't necessarily want the baby to live, they'll do something to the baby, they'll poison the baby, or they'll poison the umbilical cord, or they'll do something so that that baby, or they'll take the baby out in parts, they'll do something so that baby won't live. But then they'll prepare the woman's body for a day or two, so that that baby will be delivered dead. That's what a lot of late-term abortions are. If we go back now and we think, that situation, that's going to happen, that's what happens when you hear a lot of those women who went to Britain for life-limiting conditions. What you didn't hear a lot of the time, you heard that the baby was born sleeping. Yeah. And you assumed, oh, the poor baby was so sick, they couldn't even make it through the birth process. Yeah. What you didn't hear so often was that mother often felt that baby moving inside her. They did something to poison that baby so the mother would feel that baby's heart stop beating, feel that baby stop moving inside them. And they would prepare her body for a day or two. She would have to walk around with a baby that wasn't going to live and that had already died for a day or two until she delivered her baby dead. That is the part of abortion that a lot of people haven't heard and a lot of people don't hear until they're going through it. That is pretty traumatic. But when we look back to this and we're talking about it's immediately necessary to carry out a termination of pregnancy to avert that risk, can you see how later on in pregnancy, an abortion, a late-term abortion is not an immediate solution. If you need to immediately end that pregnancy, you induced labour or you deliver the baby by C-section, and you do that immediately. So that woman came in from an hour later, the baby was delivered by C-section, the baby was fine, the mother was fine. So when people talk about using this emergency situation to allow up to birth, no, beyond viability, you should be delivering that baby by C-section or by delivery. A late-term abortion is not an immediate solution to an urgent risk. So that's just a really important point. It can take days, it's not helpful for immediate risk. And again, we're calling Simon Harris to honour his promise. He said early delivery will be mandated after viability. He said there will be no late-term abortions. This section has no time limits, would allow an abortion on the say-so of one doctor right up to the middle of the birth process. That is not what Simon Harris promised. And if that doesn't change, and if it's still going to be all the way up to birth that a baby could have their life intentionally ended, we need to extend conscientious objection to this section as well. It has to be extended there to protect the medics. Okay, so the last of the main sections then where abortion will be allowed. So I said there was 4 situations abortion could be allowed: 12 weeks, no limits, no reason, risk to life or health up to viability, or risk to life or health in emergency up to birth, and then this last one then where the baby is likely to die. So again, up to birth there are no time limits here. That's really important to note. There's no time limits. The baby is not likely to live. So it says here, termination of pregnancy may be carried out where again we're back to 2 doctors again, or the reasonable opinion informed in good faith that there is present a condition affecting the fetus that is likely to lead to the death of the fetus either before or within 28 days of birth. Can anyone remember what the wording of that was before the referendum? So either before or shortly after birth. So when people voted, again, not everybody looked at the legislation, but the ones that did, when we voted on it, it said likely to lead to the death of the fetus before or shortly after birth. Before or shortly after birth, we're presented with this image of a baby that literally probably won't make it to birth, and if they do, maybe a few minutes, until the cord is cut or something like that. Now it's saying the baby might die within 28 days of birth. And the baby needs to be likely, like this word likely, I think it was Maria Steen during the Claire Byrne debate, she said, likely in terms of the law, it's like 50-50, greater than a 50% chance. So we're saying, okay, so there's something wrong with your baby, there's a 50-50 chance they won't make it beyond a month after they're born, so let's help you out and end your baby's life now. That's what this part of the bill is saying. And I know that there are a lot of really serious conditions, and I know this must be an incredibly traumatic diagnosis to get at any stage. But I think the way that this is going right up to birth, no limits, the baby must be able to survive more than 28 days, or this could be allowed. That goes way beyond what I think people thought that this was going to do, or way beyond what is necessary, or what is in any way helpful for anyone. So this definition, again, a reasonable opinion formed in good faith. No one can know for definite. makes a diagnosis completely subjective again. One doctor can think, well, in my experience, I've never seen a baby survive longer than 2 days with this disease. Another doctor who's done different research knows that babies have survived months or years. They'll give very different answers on whether this baby is viable or not, or whether this baby is likely to live or die. Misdiagnoses are possible. How many of you heard stories during the campaign where somebody said, I was told my baby would not live? Here she is, 2 years later, 10 years later. We've all heard those stories. Doctors get it wrong. You know, misdiagnoses are made. No one can know how long a baby will live after birth, and life should not be ended based on speculation. I heard a really interesting piece way before the referendum. The doctor in the States talking about life-limiting conditions and how the survival rates for babies born with life-limiting conditions were much higher where the baby got the diagnosis after birth. Because then, at the time of birth, they were expecting the baby to live, so everybody jumped in to do everything they could to help that baby live. Whereas when the diagnosis was given before birth, it was expected the baby wasn't going to live. So they didn't make as much effort. They tried to just give comfort care and just let the parent have time with the baby. So actually, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And especially you say, well, if the baby might not live, we'll just help you end their life now. Rather than saying, and you know, many of you might have heard John Paul and Cleona, or JP and Cleona Johnson sharing their story of their little boy, John Paul, who was given that diagnosis of anencephaly, told he probably wouldn't live. They said that was horrific, it was terrifying, but they chose to continue with their pregnancy. And they made that time special, that time when they were still pregnant. Yes, it was difficult, but they made that baby part of their lives during the time of the pregnancy. And they said it was 17 minutes that baby lived, but they said that 17 minutes he had a lifetime of love. And they got to hold him, and they got to know him, and they got to, and they got that time with their baby. And other babies are born that live longer than they're expected. And other babies don't make it to birth. Like Vicky Wall, some of you might have heard Vicky Wall's story. It's an incredible story. Her daughter Leodon, she didn't make it to full term, but Vicky made those memories with her baby. She had that time with her baby, and actually for parents, the grief studies, when they follow up with parents 2 years after, the parents who continued with their pregnancy for the natural life of that child, up to birth and after birth, those parents were doing much better themselves with their grief than those parents who chose to terminate. So when parents have heard, and so many parents got the diagnosis in this way, I'm so sorry, and this is what we heard from nearly everyone who shared their story on both sides, but this really broke my heart. They said, oh, well the doctor told us our baby had this really rare condition, that they weren't likely to live, and that most parents in our situation went to England. And then they left us, and they didn't help us, and they didn't tell us anything else. Can you imagine being left with that information, and that heartbreak, and then having to do all that research and not knowing what's going on? But imagine if you were given the diagnosis in another way. And he said, I'm really sorry, there's something really serious wrong with your baby. Most babies with this condition don't live. But I can't guarantee you your baby will live. I can't guarantee you anything. It's not looking good. But what I can say is that we will be here for you. We will support you. We'll support your baby. We'll help you make memories. We'll do everything we can to help you make memories while you're pregnant. We'll do everything we can to make that time when the baby is born, as special as possible, that you connect with your baby, and we will support you in any way. We'll put you in touch with families who've been in situations like yours. We will help you through this. Can you imagine how you might feel a little bit differently? And I think that's one thing we need to be pushing, is that people are given proper supports and proper counselling when that happens. I think it's an absolute shame on our government and on our health system that doctors and nurses weren't already giving women supports and information. They were just giving them despair and prescribing death. And this is what I put up on Twitter. I think that our health system at the moment, when there's any problem in pregnancy, even in Ireland, even where we had the 8th Amendment, the doctors would say, oh, if there's a lot of women consider travelling. They're saying, well, we can't guarantee anything. In countries where abortion is legal, they say, yeah, this baby probably isn't going to make it, they have this condition, we recommend termination. They're recommending death. They're not giving patients any hope, they're giving patients despair. They're saying, because we can't guarantee you a perfectly healthy baby, either to protect themselves or because they think it's the best thing to do this, and why don't you try again? We'll just end this pregnancy, we'll try again. It's the life of a child. And what we would hope is that doctors would prescribe hope. They would say, look, we can't guarantee, but we will hope, we will do our best to give this baby a chance, and we will prescribe life, we'll offer life. So many parents were never told of prenatal care. They weren't told of hospice care, they weren't told of support groups. In this situation, women must be given all information, all choices and all supports. It's the same thing again. Women have to be given information on the choices and supports that are there. Otherwise, there's no choice at all. And it's also important to note that was changed after a referendum, as I mentioned. Shortly after birth, now it's 28 days. But is a life of 29 days any more value than a life of 28 days or 29 minutes? You know, is life, if you were told that your baby would only live a few days, would you not want that few days? And what if the condition was discovered just after birth? You kind of think, well, you know, surely nobody'd end a baby's life after birth. In the Netherlands, if a baby is given a diagnosis that they're not likely to live long after birth, they can help end that baby's life faster, up to 1 year after birth. That was one of those times where I saw that, some pro-lifer told me that, and I kind of went, that's ridiculous. But, as I always do, I went off and said, right, let me look it up. And I looked it up, and that's true. In Australia, there are people calling for that. They're calling for abortion after birth, not just if there's something wrong with the baby, but they're saying, well, still not really a person a few weeks after birth.
Yeah.
Like, and you know, if you're going to allow abortion 1 minute before birth, there isn't a whole lot of difference between a baby a minute before and a minute after birth. That's the logical consequence of saying all human life doesn't have equal value. Where do you draw that line? So it's a scary, scary line. And as I mentioned earlier, this is often a second or third trimester diagnosis. And in the UK, they'll often perform feticide if it's beyond 22 weeks because they don't want the baby to live. So they will give the women the option sometimes. So a woman might choose to have her baby delivered alive and to have that time, however short it is, with her baby. But very often they'll perform feticide and they'll poison that baby in the womb to make sure that that baby won't come out living. That's unfortunately what happens, that the baby isn't even given a chance to live a short life and the parents are given no chance to meet their baby. So we're saying feticide should be restricted. Babies have to be given a chance to live. It's as simple as that. And I know it's not simple for anybody, whoever might see this video, it's not simple, but I would like to think that we give every baby a chance, that every human gets a chance. Every mother should get every support and every baby should get every chance. So that's in part 2, they're all conditions a woman could have an abortion. Sections 14 to 19 then are about a review process. So even though a woman could go to another doctor for a second opinion, if the doctor didn't give her granted the abortion she was looking for, there is still an appeals process. So even though there's extremely broad criteria, as you have seen, if a woman is really minded to have an abortion and a doctor is really minded to grant an abortion, there are plenty of wide grounds there that can be used, but if not, there's a review process. And it's really the biggest section of the whole bill. Huge parts of the bill are taken up with this review process, and all the times it will have to happen and who'll be on it. Everything in this bill is designed to make sure that if somebody wants an abortion, they'll find a way of getting an abortion in this legislation. Everything Simon Harris has changed, if you think about it. He changed from shortly after birth to 28 days after birth. That makes it stretch it that bit further out to make it that bit easier to say, yeah, we can guarantee the baby will live 28 days. To change from viability being the point where the baby could survive outside the uterus to surviving outside the uterus without extraordinary life-sustaining measures, stretching it out. And we'll see in conscientious objection, he's stretched it out every time. But there's a review process just in case. And then the last bit on that is notification. So form of certification just means when a doctor is signing off to say that the abortion should be granted or has been performed, they need to say which section is it under. So is it under section 10, 11, 12 or 13? What was the main reason for it? And then there's notification. So in England, as any of you looked at the 2016 or any of the years, the abortion statistics, England and Wales. If you looked at it, I think 2016 is good to look at because it's in a booklet that you can download. 2017 is kind of data tables, it's not as easy to look at in one go. But they give really detailed information. So you know the age of the woman, the ethnic background of the woman, how many previous abortions she's had. And in England, 40% of them, 39% of abortions are repeat abortions. Some women have had up to 8 or more abortions. So they record those kind of things. They record it if there was multiple fetuses, multiple babies, and reduced down. The number of babies was reduced. They record, what was the marital status of the woman. They record what parts of the country she was living in. They record, all these statistics of her age, the stage of pregnancy, if there was a health risk to the mother, what was the health risk, if there was a health problem with the baby, what was the disability, what was the diagnosis, what type of procedure was used, they don't always record as feticide used, but they record, which of the procedures was it? Was it medical, was it surgical? They record a lot of information so that they can use that information to inform their public health policy. And I think if you're going to do something like this, you do need that information. Wait till we hear what our government were asking to be recorded. 4 things. The name of the doctor, which head of the bill it was under, the date the abortion happened, and the county of residence. So we would know 500 women in County Cork had abortions. These are the dates. These were the main reasons. Can you make good public health policy based on that? No. What we're asking for is the same level of detail as the UK at a minimum should be gathered. The age of the woman, the gestation of pregnancy, the reason, type of procedure, number of previous abortions. Unless we have that information, we can't know what are the demographic of women having abortions, what can we do to help support them, what can we do to reduce the number of abortions. That's a really important thing that we should be looking for. So that's section 2, and then section 3, we're not looking at much in here, you'd be glad to know. Very brief note on consent, and just one thing so that you know, this consent, one of the writers of the Irish Times put in July, said, oh, this new bill that came out after the referendum has a wonderful new section on consent. There was a section on consent, the exact same one in the bill that came out in the version in March. It was in the table of contents. So I'm saying that person who wrote the Irish Times didn't even look at the table of contents to see there was a section on consent. And that section on consent is very short, and it says, nothing in this bill shall operate to make any changes to medical consent during medical procedures. So essentially, it doesn't change anything about consent. A lot of people said that abortion was needed to improve the issues with consent during pregnancy and childbirth that women face in hospitals. This bill does nothing about it. And those problems exist in other countries, they can be addressed without the 8th Amendment, and they're not addressed here. So it's just a side note for anyone who's been looking at that. And conscientious objection, then we'll look at that, and this is the last of the big sections. So, conscientious objection. So, at the moment, it's kind of an opt-out for carrying out or participating in an abortion procedure, but referring isn't included, so they're saying you have to refer on. So you can opt out of performing it, you can opt out of participating in it actively, but you can't opt out of referring, and it's doctors, nurses, midwives only. So we're saying, so it says, nothing in this act shall be construed as obliging a medical practitioner, nurse or midwife to carry out or participate. It's important to note as well, it's saying nothing in this act will oblige anyone, but it's not protecting you if your hospital, your employer, obliges you as part of your employment contract. You wouldn't be protected then. So it's not a really positive right to, freely object and not have your career put in danger, not have your job put in danger, not have your, not be struck off the register. It's not a positive protection. It's kind of saying, well, we're not going to say that you have to. So that needs to be changed. And also it's changed before the referendum was said to assist. Assist can kind of be a bit broader. It covers a lot more people from the conscientious objection. Participate is really actively participating. So what about people who are rostering services in a hospital? What about in a busy ward in CUMH down in Cork or in any maternity hospital? And there's a busy ward and there's 8 women in your ward and 4 of them are there for abortions, 4 of them are there because they've had miscarriages or they're having some other gynecological procedure, and you're expected to take care of all of them. Now, of course any nurse will take care of a woman who's had an abortion, but any nurse with a conscientious objection doesn't want to have to be the one to help in performing that abortion or to schedule that abortion or to prepare maybe to administer drugs or to be part in any way of that. This wouldn't let them opt out of that. It's not broad enough to protect people who have an objection to this. So others like pharmacists as well. Pharmacists are a big omission, and they're the ones asked to dispense abortion pills in chemists. And they need the right to opt out. And protection should be extended to any activity linked to abortion. I mentioned already section 11, the section on emergencies. There's an opt-out, or this conscientious objection isn't given at the moment for section 11 emergencies at all. That's a problem because this can include intentionally ending a baby's life right up to birth, not just ending pregnancy. So that's needed there. And then the last bit is the transfer of care. So if someone does have a conscientious objection, they can opt out, but they have to refer on. Transfer of care means signing the death sentence for one of your patients. A woman walks in pregnant with her baby. If you transfer the care of that woman to another doctor, you're effectively saying, well, I won't end your baby's life, but I'm going to write you out this letter with my name on it, recommending that you do have this life-ending procedure for your baby, but this doctor will do it, but I'll have my name on it. That's signing a death warrant for that baby. And I would recommend, if you haven't looked at some of these procedures, there's been no talk about which procedures will be legal or not. These are the most common ones done in England and in America, in safe, legal abortion clinics. We're not talking about backstreet abortions, we're not talking about anything like that, we're talking about procedures that are on the NHS, that are done in hospitals. If you look at one of the procedures that's done, the D&E abortion, the second trimester, 13 to 24 weeks, that was the procedure. When I saw that in the video and I saw that the doctors would actually reach in, with, to prepare the woman's body a little bit. They'd reach in with surgical tools and literally pull off an arm, pull off a leg, and remove that baby piece by piece. I have to say that was the moment for me that I went from being passively interested in doing a little bit to going, how is this legal anywhere? And how does the doctor go in and do it time after time after time? And I would say if a woman comes into me, like my 3 friends who found out they were pregnant at 24 weeks, if we were in a country where abortion is legal at that stage of pregnancy, which we will be soon if this comes through, and a woman comes into me and finds out she's pregnant at 23 weeks and doesn't want to be and wants an abortion, and I know that at that stage that abortion might involve a doctor literally tearing that baby inside her apart limb from limb. There is nothing you can do. You can throw me in jail, you can do whatever you want. If I was a doctor and asked to do that, I will not send my patient and her baby up to another doctor who will tear her baby apart. I won't do it. And I hope that there are a lot of doctors and nurses in this country who won't be part of that. So when we're talking about, it's not talking about, you know, this theoretical, well, I'm not going to help you. And this idea has been put out there that it's doctors saying, I won't help you. These are doctors saying, I will help you, I will help your baby. Here are supports, here's information, I will do everything I can to help you, but I won't help you end your baby's life. That's what those doctors are saying. And if the government wants to provide the service of abortion, they want to call it a service, call it a medical procedure, make it free, call it healthcare. If they want to do all that, and people have decided they're free to do that, and if the government decides to do that and they legislate for that, it is the government's responsibility to make sure women know how to find out about that. It is not the responsibility of a pro-life doctor to provide that information. And they should not be forced to do anything. They shouldn't be forced to refer, and they shouldn't be forced to ignore their clinical judgment. And it's important here as well. Some doctors might actually believe that sometimes abortion is okay, but there might be a woman sitting in front of them who is suffering with mental health problems. And that doctor might actually believe, well, you know what, in this particular situation, I think this could be a really bad idea. Like, I might have agreed for somebody else, but I actually think for her, it could be really dangerous, it could be a really bad thing. They're still obliged to send them on to somebody else. So it's not just about moral objections, it's certainly not about religious objections. Yes, some people with faith will say, I'm not doing it on religious grounds, but I think the majority of pro-life doctors, nurses, midwives are saying, ethically and morally, this is a human being. This is a human being that I've been trained to protect. I won't be part in ending their life, and nobody should be forced to. And if doctors are forced, we've seen just a few brief statistics on doctors to clarify where things are. Doctors haven't been consulted. They said it would be a GP-led service. Doctors weren't consulted when Simon Harris said that. They still haven't been consulted. Yes, some of the unions have kind of been talking, and some of the training groups have been talking to Simon Harris. He's refusing to meet with pro-life doctors and nurses and midwives, refusing. The unions, the doctors have been writing to their unions asking for emergency general meetings before the health committee so they can make their views known, make their concerns known. None of those meetings are going to happen until after the health committee. So their concerns are just not being taken on board. And of those doctors, they've done a few surveys. 75% of doctors said they didn't think it should be a GP-led service. They weren't all saying they were conscientiously objecting, but they were saying this should not be something that sits with GPs. It's not in any other country. It's normally a clinic or it's a hospital or it's a, you know, it goes through a different route. It's not all the responsibility of GPs like Simon Harris is trying to force in this country. The doctors don't want that. A good number of doctors are saying they will completely conscientiously object. I think about 20% are saying they'll conscientiously object altogether and they won't refer. Only about 20% are saying they'll really opt in and they're happy to provide this service. And then you have a lot in the middle that are saying, well, we won't opt in, we don't really want to do it, but we might refer, but we don't want to do it ourselves. So the majority of doctors don't want to be the ones doing this. And most doctors don't think that GPs should be the ones with that responsibility. So we need to support our doctors in this. So we're pretty much at the end. These were more sections that was added after. Did you hear during the campaign that abortions would be free? No. They kind of mentioned very briefly at the very start, back in February maybe, that they'd be free. And I think they realised, you know, safe, legal, rare and free. I think they realised quite quickly that people didn't like that idea of free abortions. So they dropped the free, but they brought it back in again a few weeks ago. Simon Harris said there'd be no cost barrier for any woman, should not have a cost barrier to accessing abortion. But I would say, what about women shouldn't have a cost barrier to having a baby, and not just to being pregnant, but to having a baby, and no woman should feel that for socio-economic reasons she can't afford to have a child. And we know the vast majority of abortions are for socio-economic reasons. The Healthy Oireachtas Committee, they produced a really biased report. They had a really biased committee. They had about a 7-to-1 ratio of pro-repeal versus pro-retention of the 8th Amendment. 7-to-1 ratio of witnesses. Imagine that in a court of law. Of course it's going to come out one-sided. But it did. But even they acknowledged in their report, they said, we did discover that the vast majority of abortions have nothing to do with rape or life-limiting conditions, but are for social and economic reasons. They acknowledge that. We all know that. Yet that's the one thing that wasn't addressed. So when we know that most abortions are on that grounds, that's what we should be doing, and saying, how can we support women so they don't feel they have to choose between their job and a child, or their education and a child. Tell women about the supports that are there, and fill in the gaps where there are gaps in that support. But anyway, Simon Harris decided he's going to make abortion free. All you have to be is ordinarily resident in the state of Ireland. No other limits. Surgical abortions, medical abortions. In England we said a lot of women, about 38% of women have had at least one previous abortion. Some have had up to 8 or more. There's no time limit in there. There's no limit in there at all. So we'll all be paying for it. So it suddenly becomes very much our business if our taxes are going to be going towards ending lives rather than saving lives. Like we would hope. So that's a really significant thing that changed. So that's, and there's a few other sections we need to look at. We don't need to look at these in more detail tonight, kind of more technical things that's happened there in that last section. And just to finish up then, what's not included or not known. So I mentioned earlier, people say there's nothing to talk about, it's all over. I hope you'll have seen from the presentation I've just given that there are a lot of issues with what is in the bill. A lot of things weren't told us before the referendum, and a lot of things were changed since the referendum, and Simon Harris promised things before the referendum that just aren't in the bill, and then he put things in like free abortion that weren't promised at all. So a lot of things have changed, there's a lot of concerns, no protections for women to make sure they're given full information and support at all stages, no protection for babies to make sure they're born alive, and no real protection for doctors, nurses, and midwives who've got a conscientious objection to being part of it. But there are also a whole lot of other things that haven't even been touched on or discussed, and we're not going into them in detail, but just to mention, early delivery that Simon Harris promised not in there. Will feticide be allowed? Feticide, poisoning the baby to make sure the baby is dead before you deliver them late on, will that be allowed? Who knows, it's not mentioned. Babies born alive, will they be given treatment or not? Who knows, it's not mentioned. Protection against discrimination, Simon Harris promised it. Nothing about it in the bill. Buffer zones, just one note on buffer zones. There was talk about putting in something into legislation on buffer zones to put that you couldn't protest outside an abortion clinic or a doctor's surgery. He said now there's some technical issues with that. He's going to put that into a later piece of legislation, so that's not included in the current one. Over in England and Ealing they had a buffer zone. They got given a buffer zone. Then the courts they tried to implement it over all of England and Wales, and somebody in the government looked into it and said, well actually that's disproportionate. If there's people harassing, we've got laws to protect people against being harassed and intimidating. And if people are just offering support, they said there's enough people who come forward to say their children are alive because they were offered support. That was the only place they were offered support. He said it's disproportionate. So I'm hoping that's the reason it's not in there just now. But it's not in there at the moment, but he talked about it. It might come in again. He's talking about a companion piece of legislation. But again, nothing in there. Where will abortions take place? He wants them all to take place at home, in people's homes. What will happen to the tiny baby that's delivered into the toilet most often? What will women do in that situation? Will they be told? Nobody knows. Nobody'd like to talk about that. We were only hearing about GP-led abortions, medical abortions. You take a pill and, baby's gone. Now, obviously, anybody who's been through a miscarriage or looked into it will know it's a much more traumatic process than that. You take a pill that stops progesterone, stops the nutrients getting to the baby dies. You take another pill that expels the baby, induces the miscarriage. It's a pretty traumatic and horrific process for a woman to go through. Worse for some women than others. It's not as traumatic for everybody, but it's generally a pretty unpleasant process. They wanted to happen at home. They said we'll all be at home. What they didn't mention was that a huge number of abortions are in hospitals. They're surgical. They're these other procedures we looked at. And they didn't talk about that till after the referendum. They literally did not talk about abortions in hospitals. So they couldn't be asked questions about what about the woman in the bed with a miscarriage beside the woman who just came in to enter pregnancy intentionally. They didn't talk about any of those things. Haven't talked about it. And they're still avoiding talking about what procedures would happen. I haven't heard any government minister talking about them. What types of procedures will be allowed? Again, you can look at abortionprocedures.com. How will the tiny bodies be disposed of? There are a number of amendments gone in around that. We're asking for on the pro-life side, we're asking that they would be either cremated or buried, that they would be given dignified disposal. We're saying all the stuff about the tomb babies and whatever did or didn't happen to those babies when they were alive, however they died. Apparently there were headstones there, and but whatever happened to them, there's now this concern about that their bodies were, they weren't treated with dignity, and that they're going to exhume the babies, and they're all this concern about those babies that weren't treated with dignity. And yet here we are talking about babies, and we're not talking about what will happen to them. We know in other countries often babies are incinerated. In one hospital in England, they were using the incinerated bodies of babies to heat the hospital. And they won't even talk about it here. So when we talk about burial or cremation, people are getting upset about that, but to say the alternative to that in America, baby body parts are being sold for research. They're quite expensive. Can you imagine what that does to a vulnerable woman? Vulnerable woman, and somebody saying, well, look, come on, the abortion providers are slightly more incentivised to encourage someone to have an abortion if there's money to be made. So we need to make sure there's no money to be made from anyone by having abortions from the baby's body parts. Every baby, every human life, they should have dignity in life. If we can't guarantee that, we should be guaranteeing them some dignity in death. We're not asking that they have a funeral service, although, especially if the baby's life-limiting condition, they might want that, but we're saying that they should be given a mark of respect and either cremated and acknowledged or buried, that their bodies would be taken. But there has just been no talk on these. Like, no talk. Nobody's wanted to talk about it. And if they don't agree with that, let them say what they do think should happen, because they're just ignoring it. And what about pain relief for babies who can feel pain? Babies can feel pain. If you have a premature baby, you'll see they'll feel pain. You can feel pain if they're on the inside as well. There are debates about at what point. But again, so these are things that aren't in the bill, but nobody's talked about. So there's a whole lot to be talked about with this that hasn't been talked about, and they're trying to rush it through without talking about them at all, and just downplaying any concerns that anyone has. So this is just a reminder, you have it all in your sheet of paper, just a reminder of the main issues of the bill. Hopefully it's all a lot clearer now. The key point of it all is termination is a medical procedure intended to end the life of a baby, not extending a pregnancy, ending the life. There are 4 conditions where a termination of pregnancy or abortion will be allowed: up to 12 weeks with no reason, up to viability, which is really undefined point in time, for unspecified health risks to the mother's physical or mental health, or at risk to her life, up to birth in an emergency risk to life or health, and up to birth if the baby is not likely to live long. And there are major restrictions on conscientious objection, and abortions will now be free as well. And just a reminder then as well of the amendments that we looked at. So the kind of amendments we're looking for, and I hope you'll see as well, they're not unreasonable. And I think that most of the amendments I talked about are things that most reasonable people would actually agree with. So it's not about saying we're going against the will of 66% of the people. I think the majority of people, even most yes voters, would actually say, of course the baby should be given treatment for born life, of course women should be given information, so they make an informed choice. So protect the healthcare workers, they get genuine freedom of conscience. Protect the mothers, make sure they're given information and counselling and support at every stage that they need it. And protect the babies, give them a reasonable chance to live at all stages where possible. So that is all. I'll come back to questions afterwards, but just for the purpose of the video, we'll just finish up. But what I would just say is for everyone who's heard this, whether you're here or whether you're watching on the video, who will you talk to about it? So we've learned hopefully something, hopefully you've heard something you didn't know before. You may be more confident in talking about somebody who has some resources. Who will you talk to about it? Is there a friend or family member you haven't spoken to about it yet that you might just share something that you heard that concerned you? Is there a TD you might talk to? Is there a senator you might talk to? Is there colleagues at work that you might talk to? And just some key lobbying tips very briefly, that if you are going in to talk to TD, for example, just pick 1 or 2 points. You don't need to make a lot of points, you mightn't get a lot of time, but just pick 1 or 2 points that are important to you. Prepare respectful or challenging questions. What you're asking is to reject the bill, but also to propose and support amendments. At this stage now, the amendments are there, but you're asking to support them, just go in and speak about them, or to vote against them if they get a chance in the or for them, depending on the amendment. And if you have a story, maybe your child was told you were told your child wouldn't live, but they did. Or maybe you have a friend who had an abortion and hasn't quite recovered from it. Whatever your story is, share that with them, because they have a lot of issues on their plates. They'll only learn from the stories they heard. We heard a lot of people made up their minds based on stories they heard, and a lot of people only heard stories on one side. So share your story if it's relevant, or a story of someone in your life. If you don't know something, just say it. You don't need to know everything. They don't know everything about the bill. You won't know everything about the bill. But say, look, well, I don't know that, but I'll be happy to find out. You can get in touch with somebody who's a bit more experienced, who has a bit more knowledge. You can get in touch with Education at Pro-Life campaign. They'll give you information as well. And remind them that you vote pro-life. yes, 66% of people voted yes to remove the 8th Amendment. They didn't all want, a lot of them thought they were getting restrictive legislation. I think a lot of those voters, when they see the legislation that's proposed, when they realise it's not what they voted on, it's not what they thought, it's not what they were told, I think some of those will be voting slightly differently as well. And there's a big pro-life vote out there. 34% of the electorate is nothing to be sneezed at for politicians. And we've got canvassing teams that were out right across the country. Imagine getting those canvassing teams behind you as a politician. And then just more really practical things as well, then to go and choose, as I mentioned earlier. So you win 3 or 4 of you, you can intimidate a poor TD that's trying to do their job. They have people coming into the morning, noon and night. If you go in on your own and they're a really experienced politician, you might feel a bit lost. So it's better to go in 2s if you can. Find some common ground. Look, it's not going in about challenging and fighting. It's kind of going, look, we all want to protect women. Wouldn't it be great if we made sure women were given information? Like, I didn't know what support services were there. If I got pregnant out of the blue, I wouldn't know what to do. Wouldn't it be great if doctors had resources they could give to women when they were pregnant? Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be great if we put that in the bill to make sure every woman was given all that information? So come at it from that point of view rather than, and if a TD is pro-life, encourage them to speak up. Tell them you're behind them, tell them you appreciate what they've done up to now, and encourage them to speak up, to be brave, to stand out, and to speak up for what they believe in. Be moderate and respectful, and you don't want anyone going off talking about crazy pro-lifers who come in, shouting and screaming at them. Thank them for their time. I mean, in the same way, I'm really thankful to those of you who've come here tonight to hear what I have to say. I'm sure that any TD who gives you time, they've got everybody coming after them, so thank them for giving you time to share your ideas and your opinion and to ask them to vote in whatever way you're asking them to, what way you're asking them to vote, but thank them for their time, appreciate that. And you can let Pro-Life Campaign or other pro-life groups know how you got on, so you can get in touch with education@prolifecampaign.ie just to let them know where different TDs are at. And if you need help as well, you can email that email address and get information if you need information on a topic or a resource. So that is it. So I'll just go to the very last one there.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening.
You deserve a whole applause for that. Maeve, you talked about prescribing, doctors prescribing hope, and I think you have prescribed hope. I think we have to have hope, and there's not much hope on the horizon about the bill itself. We have hope about amendments, and the one thing I thank the TD that was here tonight, John McGuinness, by email or whatever, phone call, whatever, and we really do have to think of the likes of the Fine Gael TD, Pat Deering, function. We have to think of all of them, to target all of them, no matter what way they vote, to support amendments, pro-life amendments. Because, and that is the point is we will be voting pro-life from now on. It mightn't have been a big issue up to now. They seem to have been able to brush it aside up to now, but it is going to be, I think, a major issue, and we have to make it a major issue from now on. And they will have to do that. And Gianna Kerr, I know you didn't mention anyone in particular, but I know that the likes of Gianna Kerr don't get funding from the HSE, and that's why a lot of doctor surgery won't display their leaflets or posters. As Magella, every life counts, and one day more. A lot of people don't know they exist. Yeah.
And there's a plan to try to live.
Yeah, they're trying to
they're trying to make sure that they're trying to rule out anybody who won't provide information on abortion.
Yeah.
They're trying to live. So the only way to counter that is for us to fund them and support them.
Yeah. So Gianna Kerr have fundraisers coming up, they have a major one during the year next year, and they have a ball or a dance in Dublin. What day is that? It's the 1st of December, that's right. And so to urge you all to support those. And the health committee members themselves, you can get the list of them online. I have the list of them that I can write them down for anybody that wants them. The actual people who sit on the health committee, there are 3 Fianna Fáil people, there's a few independents, etc. They're the ones that will be voting on this. But some of the amendments, but I think every amendment will get, some of them might get put out at that stage in the health committee.
Yeah, I think and there's a load of them, there's 180 of them, but like a lot of them are things like, one of the things they're trying to do is change termination of pregnancy to abortion everywhere. So and they're trying to change that definition of termination of pregnancy, they're trying to change that, they're trying to change woman to pregnant person. So you can imagine that like changing woman to pregnant person, that crops up maybe 10 different times in the bill. So that's maybe 10 of 180. So there's a lot of repetition in some of them, but then there's some really significant ones again then about like pain relief to babies, proper treatment of the remains of the baby, things like informed consent, making sure women are given information. There's a lot of bigger amendments, but they're trying to get rid of the 3 days, they're trying to do all sorts of horrific things. They're even trying to get rid of that life-limiting condition. I think they're trying to put it back so that it would be that a baby is a condition that would mean a fetus is not likely to live long, maybe, or not likely to live, just to make it really vague so that, if a baby went to their life limited to 20 years or something rather than normal 70 or 80, that, it's just that there's all sorts going in and we just don't know what's going to happen. But I would say as well on that, while we mightn't get all the amendments we want, it would actually be an achievement if at the end of the health committee this bill isn't worse. That mightn't sound like much, but that could be a big achievement, is if the other amendments don't get in and we don't lose ground. And whatever happens, it's going to be a horrific starting point, but it's just a starting point. A lot of TDs now are terrified of going against the will of the people, and they're not open to hearing things. Some are changing their minds, their consciences are being seared, they're only now looking at the bill properly and going, oh, I didn't realise it was that bad. So I think some of them will soften, and that's our goal as well. We might get a pro-choice TD to suddenly vote against the bill, but we might get them to be a little bit quieter about some of the things they've been shouting about. And that's a victory. And whatever happens in the legislation, some kind of legislation will go through in the next few weeks or months. But that'll be our starting point, and then we'll be back in, we'll regroup, and we'll have to do more sessions like this where we look at, right, what is the final legislation? And we say, okay, well, where is it at? And okay, what are the changes we want? And we maybe have a more organised approach where we say, okay, let's work on 2 or 3, and let's start working on those, and work to get those through. Things that people will agree with when they're being reasonable, and not feeling under pressure from the 66% vote that everyone say, oh, but people vote. People don't know what was in that bill. It's not what they voted for. But politicians are afraid that it was. So look, we're not going to get a whole lot through now, but we will be going through it. Again, this is going to be a live issue. I'd say for everyone, until it comes to a point, and I believe there will be a point when abortion won't be legal anymore. There will be a point. Whether it's a point where they have artificial wombs that can take over from the very early stages of pregnancy, or whether it's when they finally get good enough scanning that women just kind of go, oh, well, I can't do that. It will happen, or just people will wake up. I do believe it will happen. I don't think it's going to be 50 years. I hope it's a lot sooner than that. But until that happens, it will be through education.
Even stacking machines aren't actually.
No, and that's the thing. That's why most GPs don't want anything to do with it. They're saying, I'm not doing that without a scanner to make sure I know what stage that pregnancy is at. I don't have a scanner. I'm not doing it.
And then you need enough of it.
Yeah, exactly.
The only reason Sandra Harris said GPs was he was afraid to say hospitals because he would put down so much because the hospitals are overcrowded as it is.
Yeah.
Just dodging.
Yeah, I mean, like they didn't say, literally the week, all the things we were bringing up in the campaign, we were super scared. We were saying the numbers of abortions will go up. They said, no, they'll go down. The week after abortion went through, the week after our friend, and they're like, oh, we don't know how many, but we know the numbers will likely go up like they do in every other country. We told her that she wouldn't listen. The doctors can't cope with the patients they have already. GPs waiting lists, GPs are closed. They were ignoring us. The minute, like literally 2 days after the referendum count, Matthew O'Toole, that young new head of the GP group, he was on saying doctors are beyond stretched beyond breaking point, they can't cope, they're concerned. All of the things, the hospitals, that after 9 weeks an abortion will always take place in a hospital. That was totally not mentioned. Hospitals just weren't mentioned until immediately after the referendum. So all of our concerns were shelved because they knew they just wanted people to think this compassion and healthcare.
We don't have enough GPs anyway.
No, we don't.
And
the
the
GPs
old
are
country
not.
cards don't replace them now, they're emigrating.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, if you're on patients, if the doctor is pro-life, and whether it's referred or by whoever, they're going to a doctor who they're not a patient of as well. So that's another aspect to it, and can they take on that patient as well?
They're bringing part of this, let's be honest, they're bringing part of this. But it's not before that. That's
Yeah,
what
it will.
And they have abortion clinics, and they have.
It's just how clinics.
Yeah. To be honest, I prefer abortion clinics than having abortions in maternity wards.
I mean, to be honest, if they had to have it, I would as well. But I think they have to be a lot better regulated than they are. Because in England, you go into an abortion clinic,
There's no.
the only thing they're pushing in there is abortion.
Oh, yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of the Family Planning Association, like the IFPA, a lot of those groups in Ireland now, a lot of the people in those groups are very abortion-minded. So that's going to be a real challenge for us. And that would be actually a challenge I would give to everyone in this room and give to everyone I meet. We'll do what we can with legislation. We can't do much with it. We'll do what we can. That's what we're here for. And genuinely talk to your TD. Even now, just encourage the ones that are pro-life. Challenge the ones that maybe were on the fence and didn't say much. Just to say, did you realise it's up to birth? Will you at least step in? People didn't vote for up to birth. Will you at least step in with that? But what we can do, and this is something I think all of us can look at, how do we do in our own times? How do we make sure, as a really practical goal, I would say by the end of 2019, how do we make sure by the end of 2019 that every woman in Kilkenny, every woman in Carlow, every woman in Wexford, every woman in Waterford, every woman in Cork knows the support services that exist? Do we get billboards? Do we do we start to do Janet care in our area? What do we do to make sure the supports are there? We find out what the supports are first, and then we tell people. We get out on the radio, we fund them, and that's a really practical thing we can do. A lot of young people, a lot of women who weren't planning on becoming pregnant, haven't been looking, and they're not being told what the support services are. Most people I ask, even pro-life people, they can't tell me what the support services are that exist. So if we don't know, how will they know? So we need to find out and let women know. Because at least if they're having a choice, at least let it be an informed choice. That they won't say they felt they had no choice. That they know where the women's shelter is if they're in an abusive relationship. They know where the rape crisis centre is. They know where the mother and baby support is, to give them nappies, to give them help with housing, whatever it is that they'll know the supports that are there. And that's something we can do. We can get advertising and we can find out and we can tell people. And that's something really practical. And we have to do. If it's a newsletter, if it's a leaflet drop, whatever it is, how will we make sure that the women in our communities know the supports that exist? And it's a really practical thing we can do while all the legislation will have a background.
You was asking something about when are the amendments?
When are the amendments being taken?
So the amendments were submitted last week and they were published this morning. So they're up on the website now. I don't know exactly where. I have a copy here. But
I understand that the amendments are being taken tomorrow.
Yeah, so they were submitted, they were published today, but they're going to be discussed. They're starting the Health Committee are meeting tomorrow. So they'll be meeting for a couple of hours, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday this week.
Look, when's the bill is going to the report stage?
Well, yeah, but I think this kind of is the report, the committee stage, the report stage of the committee where they're going to be discussing for the next 3 days, possibly longer if they don't get through it all in these 3 days, with the Health Committee, and then other TDs can come in and kind of make contributions, but it's just the Health Committee will be voting on each one. If it's put to a vote, they mightn't even need to vote on all of them, but they'll put some of them to a vote, and then the amended bill then kind of goes off to be kind of fixed up and kind of, things put in and whatever, and then they bring that amended bill with everything that was agreed during the Health Committee stage in this week. They bring that back to the Dáil then at report stage, and then there's a discussion in the Dáil again on anything that was still an open issue or that still needs to be looked at, and then they all vote on it.
So it's very quick.
It could be very quick, but I think this week, I'm not sure if they'll get through everything in there. They've got 3 sessions this week. I think they'll probably get through it this week, or maybe it might go into next week or something, but then it'll take a bit of time to kind of get that all updated, and then go back to the Dáil, and again, that'll probably only be a few days there in the Dáil, so they're trying to push it through, and then it has to go to Shannon, but they're doing everything they can to get it through by Christmas.
But if the Health Committee are all pro-choice, have we a chance? Those people sitting on the Health Committee?
Yeah, it's going to be tough, and that's why it's important. But that's what you see a lot of ones, even though some of them are really pro-choice, are they really pro-9 months? So if we can get TDs in there saying, Simon Harris that are in delivery, Simon Harris is sitting there and saying, you promised the people are in delivery. Whereas
John not saying that he won't have an input.
He personally isn't going to go in because he doesn't feel confident enough. But there will be other TPs in there speaking because they have to be able to.
people like Pat Jones and Matthew McGrath, Pat Jones, Carol Nolan, Matthew McGrath, Michael Collins, a lot of those, Patrick, a lot of those people again, they'll be prepped.
I have a list of them now. I have a list of them.
There's Steve Donnelly,
Roland
but the senators aren't on it, yeah, so we select health committee. So Margaret Murphy-O'Malley is the only pro-life TD on there, so it's important to encourage her and then you're going to say she's in parts of
Now, if anybody wants to know more about Gianna Care, which is one of the good ones in Ireland, there is a public meeting in Waterford in Tracy's Hotel Thursday the 22nd of November at 7:30. that's on the Key in Waterford, Thursday, the 22nd of
Really
November.
big one, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
And you as well, so a new ANEW, they have a centre up in Dublin and Cork, they have counselling now, they're state funded, but they don't refer for abortions. Now we'll look and see what happens with them, but at the moment they don't refer for abortions, they're pro-life in ethos, but we'll see what pressure comes on them, but at the moment they offer life affirming support, and most of what we have to do is the stages are funded for them.
Every life counts as government for all the elections and all the
And I've a team in it now, if anyone wants a copy of this up there as well, so please.